So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old. I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go to my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mom there. We always did that because we were too young to stay home alone, according to my mom. We got up at 10:30 a.m. I took a shower, then my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom brushing our teeth and finishing up when we heard someone knocking on our door. Since every time someone knocked at our door, they turned out to be either salesmen or Jehovah's Witnesses, we kinda waited for them to just go away. After a couple minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window, and no one was there, which was a relief. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square of glass that makes everything behind it blurry. We waited and looked, just in case it was just a bird flying by, when a hand hit it, clear as day. We got scared. We didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so immediately called the police. While it was ringing, we heard a loud bang on the door. Someone was hitting it with brute force. I don't know if they were kicking or ramming it, but it was one of the most frightening things I had ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, so I did. It took 5 bangs before the perpetrator was finally able to bash through the door. The police answered. I remember the exact thing my brother said. He was whispering. His voice could be barely heard. Hello? There's someone in our house. I think they're stealing. Then a pause. We are at... And then he says the address. Another pause. I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry. While all that was happening, I was sitting against the wall hugging my knees. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. Don't know why. Then I heard the sound that my cell phone makes when it turns off, and I remember leaving it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple minutes when I heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod that was laying in the bathroom. He started kicking the door. Who is there? The man screamed. We said nothing. Another kick, then another. I felt I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache. I had chills and it was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just too much. After that, he stopped. We heard the door opening and then silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess. Lots of papers and books on the floor. The cabinets were open, cups and plates on the floor. In my mother's bedroom, the nightstand and closet were open, and everything inside of it was all over the place. Upstairs in our room, it was the same thing. In about 5 minutes, this man was able to go through everything we had and leave it a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom and she just ordered us to go to my aunt's ASAP, so we did. When we got there, I was a little more relaxed. My aunt was waiting for us with ice cream, probably because my mom told her everything and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at 5 p.m. My mother had told her boss that she had a home emergency, so she left early. She tidied up the house, cleaned up everything, and left it the way it was before so we could be more relaxed. I really appreciated her and my aunt's effort to calm us down and do everything so we didn't have to think about it. According to my mom, the police arrived after she had arrived, which was 3 p.m., 4 hours after the incident. She explained everything, but because of lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught, and honestly, I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next few days, my mom was home with us. Luckily, no one was hurt, and he only took useless stuff, but at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old, an experience like that can lead to PTSD. I'm lucky it never came to that, and I got over it after a couple weeks. So yeah, that's my story. Edit. Many replies are related to the 4 hours it took police to get here. My house is located on the far side of the city, but also the police in my country suck. try to be brief as possible and stick to the relevant events that gave me this feeling, but the latest event happened last night and I didn't get too much sleep, so I apologize if I ramble or am unclear. My wife and I recently purchased our first home after the birth of our daughter. Everything was as you would expect for the first few months: painting, decorating, renovating, basking in our newfound slice of the American dream. You get the idea. Unusual things started happening several months ago. One day, I was getting home after work. I passed by a strange truck 2 or 3 houses down from ours. I say strange for a few reasons. We know literally everyone in this small neighborhood, and I've never seen this truck or person before. There's no reason for through traffic to come down our street, and the truck was driving very slowly, like put in drive and don't step on the gas slowly. As I pulled into the driveway, the truck flipped a U-turn and came back towards my house. Getting out of my car, the truck crawled by and the driver stared daggers at me as he passed, then sped off. I don't like to judge based on appearances, and I like to think that I don't scare easily, but something about this guy's eyes gave me a bad feeling. Obviously, this was weird. I mentioned what happened to my wife, telling her that we should be more mindful about security. When I told her the type of truck, my wife said, "That same truck drove by and the guy stared at me when I got home this afternoon. I thought he was just being creepy and checking me out." I tried to tease her a bit to lighten the mood, calling her cocky for assuming the guy driving by was checking her out. I didn't want to freak her out, but I was definitely freaked out. We saw the truck a few more times over the next couple weeks, either driving by slowly or parked down the block facing our yard. But one day the truck stopped driving by and we haven't seen it since. I sort of dismissed the whole thing as me being paranoid. Then other things started happening. In the past month or so, my wife and I have been hearing tapping on the windows at the front of our house at night. It's happened 2 or 3 times to each of us separately, always around 10 or 11 p.m., and always a soft but distinct. Now, our house is older. Creaks and cracks are not uncommon, but this sound was so distinctly intentional that my wife and I immediately looked at each other and bolted up out of the room. I had my wife and daughter lock themselves in the bathroom while I turned on all the lights and did a sweep around the outside of the house. Of course, I didn't see anything and was ready to dismiss the whole thing as more paranoia over something that probably had an innocent explanation. Until last night. Around 9:45, we heard our daughter making noise on the baby monitor. I waited a few minutes to see if she would settle down, but when it became clear that she wouldn't, I got up to put her back to sleep. The layout of the room is important to visualize this next part. This room is on the side of our house, but the exterior wall juts out a bit like an L shape, and the corner of the L is made of windows. If you're standing at the door to the room, you're directly across from these windows in one corner, and the rocking chair is in the other corner pointed towards the front of the house. One of the windows faces the street and the other faces my neighbor's house. A garden bed planted with small shrubs wraps around the outside directly underneath. I was sitting in the chair getting my daughter settled down. I had the lamp on so the room was softly lit. Once she fell asleep, I stood up and put her in her crib when something caught my eye. There was a figure standing about a foot away from the window in a bare space between the shrubs and the house. They were staring at us. I didn't look long enough to see anything more than what appeared to be a man in a light gray hoodie standing a few feet away on the other side of the grass. Sprinting from the room, I brought my daughter back to my wife in our bedroom, leaving her there while telling my understandably confused wife to lock the door. After turning off all the lights inside the house and turning on all the lights outside, I began moving from room to room, peering out the windows into the darkness. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Whoever it was must have taken off after seeing me notice them and made a quick exit. Obviously, I had some trouble sleeping after this. I spent hours checking security cameras and going from room to room looking out the windows into the night, hoping, but also not hoping, that I would see anything that could explain what happened. This morning I went outside to the spot where the figure would have been standing. I thought, well, hoped, maybe there would be a plant or something that I mistook for a person. When I got to the spot, I realized the figure had been standing exactly in a bare patch of ground about 2 feet in diameter, directly in front of the window. Part of me is still hoping that I'm being paranoid. The mind can play tricks on you in the dark, seeing things that aren't there, especially when you're a sleep-deprived new parent. But with everything that's been happening, I can't shake the feeling that there was actually someone out there last night, watching us. Please let me be wrong. Update. Nothing happened last night. I expected that would be the case for a couple reasons. First, so far all these events had taken place a week or two apart. The tapping this weekend and seeing the figure 2 nights ago were the closest in time of any of them. Second, this person absolutely realized I saw them, so I wouldn't expect them to be so bold as to come back the very next night. I still stayed up and kept an eye out though. To address some of the common questions, comments, and advice. We own several guns. I am very well versed in gun safety and a pretty good shot if I'm gonna brag on myself. Since we have a young child, I keep all the guns locked away, but after this past week, I've made sure to find places to store guns that are out of her reach, but within my reach for quickness. There are blinds, curtains, and solar screens on all the windows. The window in the story is dark, and the curtains were drawn over it that night. They're those semi-see-through white ones, so I didn't notice the blinds weren't drawn. All windows are checked and covered as soon as I get home from now on. All our exterior doors, deadbolts, and frames are reinforced. These are security measures put in by the previous owners that I thought were unnecessary, but I am now grateful for. Anybody that tries to kick their way in, the door will hold up long enough for me to get ready for them. I have purchased and installed additional exterior cameras with motion activated lights for the more remote corners of the property. Our neighbors have 2 very alert dogs that are out all night, and they have been barking more often after dark the past few weeks, which is another reason we've been on edge. I took some pictures of the place where the person would have been standing and the view that they would have had inside the house. It got me spooked all over again for sure. This occurred back when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. I lived with my parents and brother in a previously abandoned house across from a large park. I don't have a lot of definite information for what happened exactly, but I remember one night changing into PJs and getting a really creepy feeling out of nowhere. I glanced out the window out of habit, but I was on the 2nd story, so I brushed it off as anxiety or something I didn't yet understand. That is, until morning. I woke up to a very bright light igniting my room to find that we had gotten our first snowfall of the season. My brother and I just stared out the window as kids do until my dad walked up behind me to join us. My dad looked down and asked if we had gone out the window the night before. I was confused. There was a screen on my window, so I didn't even see how I could have accomplished that, and I just said no. He didn't believe me and got angry, demanding I tell the truth, which I insisted I already told him. He huffed and made heavy footsteps outside. Soon I saw my dad on the ledge outside my window, looking at something. He reached down out of sight and pulled up a string of red Mardi Gras beads, glared at me, and asked if I was sticking with my story. So I leaned out as much as I could to check out what he was so angry about, and good lord, I saw it. Next to and all around my window were crisp, new, size 10-ish boot prints, tracking all the way from outside my window, with the tracks mixed with that of the early joggers and dog walkers. It took me years to put it all together, but that creepy feeling I had makes me think that my privacy was violated long before that morning discovery. Not a great start to Christmas, I will say that. This happened way back in 2017. I'm a female and was in 5th grade at the time. Me and my sister were sharing a room and we were just casually talking. She was in middle school at the time and I was in elementary. So keep in mind, I live in a 2-story house. The rail that goes along the stairs is like a metal gate, so you're able to see downstairs. At night, you can't see shit when you're looking downstairs. It's literally pitch black, so all you can hear is movement. So that night, my sister and I were just hanging out, and all of a sudden we hear a deep raspy voice that's coming from the dark, and it said my sister's name. We completely froze. Then a couple seconds later, it said my sister's name again, but with more force in the voice. That's when me and my sister slammed and locked the door. My stomach turned so much, and I had such a horrible feeling that I was gonna die. I always tell people it sounded like a clown that lost its voice. It was so raspy and scary, and it didn't sound normal. The only people home were my aunt and cousin, but they were asleep and my mom's boyfriend had just left for work, so me and my sister were the only ones awake, so we knew someone was inside. It got so silent that we could hear the footsteps coming up the stairs and we freaked out, especially since we didn't have anything to protect ourselves if something happened. I was on the phone with a 911 dispatcher while my sister was on the phone with my mom, and my mom made me hang up on the dispatcher for whatever reason. Anyway, my mom's boyfriend gets here, and not a single thing was moved. Everything was locked, and to this day, I still truly believe someone was with us that night. I think about it every day. I truly thought I was gonna die that night. I've been debating on whether to post this or not, but I finally decided that it's been long enough for me to talk about this. This happened to me and my mom a few months ago, back in October. It happened in a very rural part of New Hampshire, on a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring out, as it had been raining for pretty much the whole day. My mom had just gotten back from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door is a big glass pane, so we can look out from the inside and someone can look in from the outside. Through this window pane, I see a man. I didn't get a great look at him as I didn't have my glasses on. The man noticed that I had seen him and waved as if he was trying to be friendly. For the rest of this post, I'll refer to him as Poncho Man. I got up and thought about opening the door for Poncho Man, but relented as I couldn't properly see who it was. I didn't want to let a stranger into the house. Instead, I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom where my mom was getting ready for work. She asked me what was up and I explained to her that there was a man in a poncho outside our door and wanted to talk to us. She went as white as a ghost. Immediately, she stopped getting ready, closed and locked the bedroom door, and started checking the windows to make sure they were locked. I asked her what was going on. My mom explained that as she was driving home, she had seen the Poncho Man. He had been standing motionless on the side of the main road. As soon as my mom turned down our road, he started to walk, presumably to follow her. She said the encounter was weird, but thought nothing more of it. Why would someone be out in the pouring rain, down a back road in the afternoon? It was like he was waiting for something. I started to panic as well. My mom called my aunt. The two of them are like best friends, and asked her what she should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, and so we did. We proceeded to pace around the bedroom, frantically looking out the window to see if we could see Poncho Man. From where the bedroom was angled, it was impossible to look at the front porch and see if he was still there, but we were desperate for anything. After what felt like hours, we finally saw the police pull up. We carefully unlocked the door and went down to let the officer in. We explained what we saw, and he agreed to scan around the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed there was something on the doorknob. I took it off and it was a political ad for a candidate that was running for office. It's possible that the Poncho Man was just campaigning for a candidate, but there's a lot of holes in that story. It was pouring out, so why would you go door to door? And why would you go that route in such a rural neighborhood? The houses are so far apart, you barely would make a dent on foot. The time doesn't make sense either. I and my mom were home, but it was about 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so you'd probably get no response from knocking anyway. Eventually, the officer returned. He found the guy down the road and had questioned him. Poncho Man was able to ID himself, and he claimed that he was a political campaigner and was just knocking on doors for that reason. When probed further, conveniently enough, Poncho Man couldn't provide any other door signs, as the one that he had left on our house was the last one. That makes the campaign story even more absurd. Our house is in the middle of the street. It's not like we were the last by any means, so why wouldn't you bring enough for the whole street? Even the officer pointed this out to us and said that it was unusual behavior. Although the officer was suspicious of him, there wasn't anything he could do about it, as there was no way to prove intent. He told us to be alert and not to hesitate if Poncho Man returns. Fast forward a few weeks, and I start noticing that the police cars seem to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive. I got curious and asked my mom about it, and she said that there were multiple break-ins into houses down the road and the police were doing some sort of sting operation. The Poncho Man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but considering how Poncho Man acted, I have a sinking feeling that they are connected. Thankfully, for the past few months, we haven't heard or seen nothing of Poncho Man. We got a new doorbell system with a camera, and the police left the area where they're doing the sting. I hope the whole situation is over and done with, and I never want to meet Poncho Man. Security advice, please. The twins, 14 years old, and I went to bed a while ago. I'm still recovering from COVID, so I fell asleep very quickly. I'm probably not entirely as quick thinking as usual. About a half hour ago, I was woken up because someone was knocking on the front door. I came down and, first mistake, opened the front door. A young man was there, asking about someone called James. My youngest brother is called James, so this confused me at first, but James has never lived here. I tried to tell him that he had gotten the wrong address, but he carried on talking, and it was clear that he wasn't talking about my brother. I told him again that he had the wrong address, and he became quite aggressive. He said I was lying and asked me to let him in so he could charge his phone. Then I will show you I'm at the right house. I tried to close the door, but he blocked it with his foot. After a brief struggle, I managed to get the door shut. When I closed the door, he carried on knocking for a while and yelled that he wasn't a scumbag and I was treating him like a scumbag. He wasn't gonna hurt me, he just wanted to charge his phone. Eventually he went away, but I am very shaken up and feeling very vulnerable. I am lucky because we have great neighbors, and I know if they heard something, they would have come running, but they clearly didn't hear this. How can I feel secure when there's only me and my kids in the house? We were taking self-defense classes, but I am very aware that tonight could have ended very differently if he had gotten into my house. Update: 24 hours after this post, my neighbors, both male, retired dad and his 19-year-old construction worker son, both built like brick shit houses. They had just found 2 lads hiding in their garden. As soon as they were found, they ran for it. The son grabbed one of them, and now they're waiting for the police. Their garden shares the fence with my garden. I didn't recognize the lad who they grabbed, but it's possible that his accomplice is the guy that tried to get into my house last night, or it may be completely coincidental. My neighbor's son has a high-end motorbike that is very desirable and is parked in the back garden for that reason. Be vigilant, people. I have had some people suggest on this thread and will definitely be hiking up home security, and I will never open the door again unless I know who it is, because I opened the door tonight when I heard my neighbor say my name. So I'll begin this with a quick bit of background info. I work in lettings and real estate, and part of this, you have to go to houses and do a yearly inspection of properties that have tenants in them. Anyway, so I organize an inspection, and it turns out the tenant won't be home, so he leaves the key out for us. He tells us that he's a spiritual person and keeps the bedroom for spiritual uses, and would appreciate it if we didn't enter it, as he doesn't even let his partner enter it. Said something about bad spirits resulting in sickness and possible death. So whatever, gotta respect some sort of boundaries as it is his home. So me and my colleague go to the property and do a quick visual inspection of the ground floor and garden. We note that in the shed there's a dog pen, but no sign of a dog. I notice that the mirror in the bathroom is covered with a blanket. Weird, but whatever. We go upstairs and see the bedroom with the closed door and a "do not enter" penciled on a piece of paper attached to it. We enter the master bedroom and see a fur rug on the floor. It's not sheepskin and appears homemade. I believe it's the poor dog. I notice there's no other mirror in the house, so the only mirror in the bathroom is covered, and this is a tradition in many cultures when holding a wake, so the spirits don't get trapped in the mirror. We felt very weird about this and got the hell out of the house. Might be more of a creepy encounter to be honest, but I just wanted to see other people's thoughts. When I was about 11 years old, my family and I lived in a large one-story house in the Wisconsin countryside. We lived on the top of a small hill, and the back of our house faced a large forested area. We only had one neighbor within a mile radius, and it was an old woman who couldn't really get around by herself. On this particular night, my parents were going to have a date night and left me to watch my two siblings. I definitely still think I was too young for this. They had given me my first phone at 9 years old so that I could watch my siblings when they weren't home. I remember it was fall time because I had my bedroom windows open to keep the room cooler at night, and I could constantly hear all the leaves brushing against each other outside. My parents had probably left around 8 p.m. and had already put my little brother, 6 years old, to bed. At this time, my brother had a huge fear of the dark and would refuse to leave his room after someone put him in bed and turned off the lights. He used to tell us that he thought someone would grab him from under the bed and try to pull him down if he tried to get up. My room was on the opposite side of the house as his. It shared a wall with the kitchen and mudroom. My sister had been sleeping in my room since we moved to this house, and by the time this happened, she was already asleep next to me. I remember being scared to fall asleep for some reason. I think I was just nervous of not having my parents at home. But around about 9:30 p.m., I started hearing crunching leaves outside my window. At first, it was quite distant. It sounded like maybe animals in the woods. But then it got closer to the house and my windows. Eventually, I could hear the distinct sound of someone's jeans rubbing together as they walked and footsteps in the dry leaves. My windows were about 5 feet above my floor, so I could never see out of them as a kid without standing on a stool. I heard the person slightly bumping into our trash cans, which were right outside the front door. Then, I heard the terrifying creak of the front door as it was pushed open slowly. Since we lived in the country, my parents never locked the doors. That's just how it was. I froze, petrified. I quickly looked at my sister, who was still sleeping peacefully, and gently nudged her to try to wake her up. She was a deep sleeper, and I didn't want to make too much noise, so instead I let her sleep. I knew it couldn't be my brother, so I texted my parents to see if they had gotten home early. I figured that maybe my dad came in first. That's why we only heard one person. At this point, I could hear one person shuffling things around in the mudroom and just walking around in there. I looked through my door and realized I hadn't locked it, as per usual, and considered trying to get up and sneak to lock it, but what I heard next made me freeze again. There was this vent connected to my room and the kitchen, and through it I heard a person step into the kitchen and give a small sigh. I heard them open a couple cupboards and open the fridge for a while. Finally, I got a text back from my dad. My stomach dropped when I read that they haven't even started heading back to the house yet, and why I asked. My dad called me and thank God my ringer was off, but I decided to pick it up anyways out of fear. I had turned down my volume all the way and spoke as quietly as I could. I told him that I thought that someone was in our house, and he freaked out and started asking questions, but I told him he had to be quiet because I was scared that the person might be able to hear me. My parents stayed on the phone while they got into their cars and started speeding back to the house. At this point, I asked them to mute themselves so that I could hear what was happening in the kitchen. That's when I realized things had gotten really quiet. I heard one of the cupboards start creaking shut, then light footsteps started making their way towards my room. My heart was pounding harder as I heard the person approach my door. I could see a slight shadow of their shoes underneath the door, but all they did was stand there. Scared that my parents would unmute themselves and I would be found, I hung up on them. It must have been a solid 30 seconds that the person stood there, not moving, not saying a word. Eventually, they just walked off. I heard them walk back through the kitchen, their jeans making some sounds as they rubbed together. While exiting the house, I heard the leaves crunch once again as they retreated back into the forest, and that sound faded away. My parents got home probably 10 minutes later and stormed into the house, opening my door first and checking if I was safe. While I explained what happened, they doubted me and said I was probably just hearing noises. Needless to say, from that night on, I locked the door religiously. I was always unsure to where he might have come from or walked back to because even if he did walk through the forest, there weren't any more houses for nearly 2 miles. Though my siblings and I did find something in the woods when we explored it maybe a couple months later. There was a small shelter that someone had built made out of rusty corrugated metal and carpet squares. It had been flooded a little because of the marshy area in the woods it was in. There's a couple of empty alcohol bottles in it, but that was it. I'm glad I never came face to face with this person, but it still gives me the creeps to think that they might have heard me, but decided not to open my door anyway, and just left. Shadow, my 115-pound German Shepherd Black Lab mix, started to signal that she needed to use the restroom about 1 in the morning. Annoyed because I was almost asleep, I got up, put a hoodie on, and took her out with nothing but my phone for a flashlight. She started to do her usual sniff for 15 minutes just to go in her regular spot routine. I had my flashlight on because she is camouflaged by the night, and I would like to know where she's at so she doesn't run off. Just as she starts using the bathroom, I turn away and notice someone. They're standing on the very edge of my yard. Looking back at my dog, I noticed she wasn't paying any attention to the person yet, so I called her to me and attached her leash. The person just stood there and watched me. I called out to them and said, "You need to leave my yard," to which I got silence back. I cleared my throat and repeated myself, eventually attempting the 3rd time just to change it to, "Don't make me tell you again, you're gonna leave my yard." Just as my partner was coming outside to see what the commotion was, they took a few steps forward, clearly intending to continue towards me. They caught a glimpse of my partner, backpedaled, turned around and left. As confused as he was, I was in complete shock. We've had to run this one person off the property because they would bring the dog over to use the bathroom in our yard. I've seen their face, but it wasn't them. They haven't been back, but right before that, we did find footprints near our shed and windows of our home. Generally unnerved. Contacted the police, and they didn't do anything other than take a statement. Been told it will go nowhere until physical harm or a break-in happens. When I was around 10 years old, I had been invited to a sleepover for the first time at my friend's house. This friend, who I'll call Abby, lives pretty far away from me, so us hanging out always felt like a special occasion. I had just started becoming brave enough to sleep away from my parents, and because she was one of my oldest friends, Abby's house was going to be one of these trial runs for sleepovers. A little bit about Abby's family. She's the youngest of 4 kids. Her older brother is about 10 years older than us, has pretty severe autism, and continues to live full-time with Abby's parents. He's always been a bit of a wild card, and I, as a 10-year-old girl, always felt a little anxious around him. Anyway, there are 3 of us girls at the slumber party. We decided to sleep on the main floor of her house so that we could stay up late and watch movies, that would eventually lull us to sleep. I had chosen the couch which was perpendicular to the wall of the window looking onto Abby's deck and backyard. The other girls had sat up on the floor on a mattress together. They were cousins. We throw in a DVD and we fall asleep quick. Sleeping away from home has never been easy for me. I wake up frequently and sometimes can't fall asleep at all to begin with. This night was one of those times where, after clocking a solid 2 hours, something stirred me back into consciousness. Coming to, I noticed the bright light of the TV glowing first before my eyes adjusted, and noticed something outside that wasn't there before. It was a person. A man, actually. He was sitting on the deck chairs, and he positioned it to face directly towards where the three of us were sleeping. He hadn't noticed that I was awake, but seeing him made my heart race. I stayed totally still, watching him. It was dark, so his features were a bit ambiguous, but I could tell that he was studying us and smirking. Terrified, I watched him for a few minutes before turning myself into the couch cushion and closing my eyes. Some time passed, maybe a few minutes, maybe a half an hour. Finally, I mustered up enough courage to look again. He was gone. To this day, I have no idea who it was that had gotten into Abby's backyard and sat on her deck, watching us in the middle of the night. But the image of him sitting there, grinning, still haunts me. For a while, I thought maybe it was her brother, but the guy had dark hair and dark eyes. Her brother was blonde. Anyway, thought I'd share this. Luckily, we all made it to the next morning unharmed, but that was the last time I ever spent the night at Abby's house. I'm a 27-year-old male. In my childhood home, there was an island in the kitchen with bar stools. If you sat in the furthest bar stool to the right, you'd be able to see through the door that opened up to the garage. One night, when I was about 6 or 7, everyone else in the family was either in the bedrooms or in the living room watching TV. My dad worked nights, so he wasn't home. I was sitting on the bar stool furthest to the right, having a nighttime snack when I look over and I see an eerie white hand wave at me. All I could see was the hand. I was petrified. I didn't know what to do or say. The hand waved again and pointed down at the doorknob as if to suggest I unlock it and open it. After that, I ran into the living room and yelled to my mother. She called our neighbor over to investigate. We lived in rural western Kentucky, so it took a few minutes for him to get there. When the neighbor finally arrived, he looked around and couldn't find anybody. It had been raining all night, but we couldn't see any evidence of tracks into the garage or in the driveway. The same thing happened to my sister not long after. She was only a year younger than me. She told me she walked up to the door after the hand gesture and almost unlocked it, but screamed and ran to my mother. To this day, I hate to think about what would have happened if either of us would have opened that door. And I hate to think about who was watching to see that two of the younger kids were alone in the kitchen, or how long they had been watching. My childhood home was a small 800 square foot 2-bedroom with a dormer upstairs room. My bedroom was along the side of the home at the back, and because my brother and I shared it, my bed was literally along the front of the window. This was in the 1970s. I recall several times being woken up tapping on my window, seeing a man-sized dark shadow looking at me and completely being frozen. My heart racing as he ran his nails on the metal screening. Usually there was no light except for the street light 3 houses away that was blocked from the rear of our house. My eyes clenched and I would hold my breath and try not to move. Eventually he'd leave. One summer night he brought a flashlight and was shining it up and down my bed and all around my room onto my younger brother, but mostly on me. My parents didn't believe me in the morning, but I convinced them to allow us to move our bed upstairs. No more window on the ground floor after that night. Edit. I never put the two together until I had my own kids. I was constantly pulling the blinds and curtains closed, and did a whole check multiple times before bed, and even shot up after everyone was asleep to check before I slept and whenever I would wake up. I'd always look outside the windows too, and my wife always asked me what I was looking for. I guess these childhood events actually still haunt me. By the way, ultimately, I think it was the lady who lived next door, son, who came to drink and visit her. He was about 10 years older than me and was always kind of creepy. An alcoholic, never married and moved from state to state. I'm guessing he was the peeper. Most of my money comes from babysitting. There's a pair of loving parents who's 1 year old I watch every week. One day, there was a knock at the door. The mom had let me know that the lady was coming to pick something up, so I assumed it was her. I opened the door to a raggedy man in a stained white tank top. The moment I saw him, I froze. With just the door open a crack, he asked if the dad of the kid I was babysitting was home. It was clear that he was up to no good, so I lied and said that it was only me and my older brother. The guy then stepped uncomfortably close to the door and asked if he could come in to check. I was alone with a 1-year-old. I said that it wasn't my house and I couldn't let him in, but that I could take a message for the parents. He told me to tell them that guilty wanted them. I uncomfortably smiled and shut the door. I immediately called the kids' parents as I ran around the house, locking the doors and windows. I watched the guy take a picture of the house and leave. My uncle, whom I trust, showed up in 2 minutes with a weapon to protect me and the baby. After hearing what happened, police were called to patrol the area. When the parents got home, they told me that the guy had some issues with them and came looking to fight the dad. The scariest job I've ever had. This happened back in 2016, and I'm still getting over the grief. I haven't really shared this story with anyone yet, but I finally decided to share it. I'm not going to say where this happened, for privacy reasons. Even though I have since moved, I'm afraid that people related to those responsible might come after me. Anyway, at the time this happened, it was August, and it was in the evening. My brother and I lived in a small 2-bedroom, 1-bath home that sat on 10 acres of land. It was what I once considered my dream home paradise. We had everything I could have wanted: a good amount of land, 2-car garage, a pole barn, and a very nice view from our back deck. Now here comes some important details to note. The house itself was a basic square with a back deck on the southwest corner of the house. It was notched in the corner of the house with 2 walls on either side forming the corner of the house. You couldn't see around the house unless you bent over the railing, and you could only see the west and southwest away from the house. The garage was on the south side of the deck. Only a few feet away from the deck was a driveway leading to the garage, so you couldn't see anyone coming up the driveway from the back of the house. Anyway, it was evening and I was sitting on the back deck smoking a joint, and my brother was in his bedroom. I was just outside enjoying the weather and the peace and tranquility of the area. Suddenly that all shattered when I heard my brother shouting, followed by 4 loud gunshots. I immediately jumped and looked around the wall of the house towards the window of my brother's room, which faces our backyard, just in time to see 3 masked men hopping out the window. They were in black and in their late 30s, but they were wearing masks so I couldn't really see their faces. One of them looked at me and froze, almost like he was expecting me not to be there. The 3 then turned and ran around the north wall of the house, towards the front yard. I threw my joint out and ran inside the house, through the kitchen, and down the hall to my brother's room. The door was opened and I went inside. When I did, I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart froze and my blood went to ice. There on the bed was my brother, laying there facing up motionless, with his eyes wide open, bleeding to death. Now what I did next probably wasn't very smart, but I ran to the living room, grabbed my M1 off the living room wall, and threw open the front door just in time to see a blue Chevy Caprice peeling out of the driveway. I fired 3 shots at them, 1 missing, 1 hitting the car's tire, and 1 hitting the back window. I must have hit one of the guys inside because I heard someone scream. Looking back, this probably wasn't a good thing to do, since there's a house across the street and I could have accidentally shot the neighbor's house. I wasn't really thinking at that time. Anyway, the car sped off and I ran back inside and grabbed some towels to try and cover the wounds on my brother's chest while also calling 911. While trying to cover up the wound, I was telling the dispatcher what happened. I knew my brother was already gone. He had no pulse when I checked, and 3 bullet holes in his chest. But I think I was in disbelief at the time. Anyway, since this area has an almost non-existent crime rate, you can bet your butt every sheriff and ambulance in the county was there in 15 minutes. I had to explain to the detective that was there what happened while trying not to break down crying. The sheriff and detective were both in disbelief since nothing like this has happened in this area in over 37 years. I'll spare you all the little details, but over the next 3 months the investigation wrapped up, and here's what I learned. After the police had gone through my brother's phone, they found that he had apparently been getting death threats. Apparently he had been hitting on a girl that was a gang member's girlfriend. The guy warned my brother to stay away from her, and even after he did that, he decided to get rid of my brother for good. Apparently, one night before he was killed, he received a message from an unknown person saying, "I'm coming for you." Somehow, the guy found out where he lived and brought 2 guys with him to do the job. The strangest thing is we lived over 40 minutes from where the gang's territory was in the city. The guy was so aggravated at my brother, he drove himself and 2 other guys 40 minutes out into the countryside just to kill him. It really amazes me how far this guy was willing to go to make sure no one went near his girlfriend. So now let me say what happened to those 3 guys. One of them was the one I had shot as the car pulled out of my driveway, and he apparently died while in the car. The other guy, who was along for the job, was caught during a traffic stop. He was dumb enough to take the same car out the next day, and there was an alert out for it. Since there aren't many sky blue Chevy Capris, it left it easy to find. He was arrested and charged with murder, and since the prosecutor where the murder happened are way more strict, he was sentenced to death. The guy who orchestrated the whole thing was actually killed in another shooting back in the city the following week. They all got what they deserved in the end, in my opinion. I did have to go to court for the guy that I shot, but because he has no family that they could find, and some other circumstances, I didn't have to go to jail. I did have a hefty fine though, for dangerous use of a firearm, due to the fact that I could have accidentally shot my neighbor's house, and had to take gun training classes, but I didn't care about that. For almost a year, I didn't do anything except for mope around my house, and barely even left my house. I never even went to my brother's room after that. I just left the door to it closed so I wouldn't be tempted to look in it. I was so devastated by what happened, I nearly lost interest in everything. I ended up packing up my stuff and just abandoning the house. I even left my brother's truck behind, sitting in the garage. I couldn't stand being there anymore, nor did I feel safe there anymore after what happened to my brother. My brother and I were really close, and to lose a loved one so tragically and suddenly in your own home is devastating. It was sad because I really loved that house and my brother, and I honestly thought it would be my forever home. I just couldn't stand being there anymore. I moved 8 hours away and haven't been back to the house, and I honestly don't think I ever will. Even though I moved, I still won't ever forget what happened that evening. I'm doing a little better now, and I have someone else living with me, but I definitely will be scarred for life from that event. I'm a 26-year-old female. I recently moved into a duplex by myself, away from the messy house situation with my 4 male housemates. It was an oasis of rugs, plants, and acceptable level of tidiness. One night, around 9 to 10 p.m., I was watching TV and probably smoking weed, because I was bad for it then, when I heard a knock at the front door. I opened it. I know. And there was a really scruffy looking guy, maybe early 30s, standing on my porch. He seemed drunk or high and mumbled something at me about coming inside. Unprepared for this kind of interaction, I dumbly said the words to the effect of, "You're not coming in. I don't know you." Though he didn't seem to understand, he gave really off vibes. He then mumbled something about meeting someone at a bar and having drinks with her, and I thought maybe he meant to knock on my neighbor's door, a maybe 40-year-old sweet but pretty rough lady I'd met a few times. I pointed at her door, and to my relief was right, and he left. I locked and chained my door and pulled my blinds right down, as my living room was fully visible from my porch. It should have been the end of it, but I had a really uneasy feeling from then on, like I was a sitting duck. I will mention I was a people pleaser and was too busy worrying about hurting his feelings to immediately slam the door on his face, like I should, and these days I would have. Fast forward 6 hours in the dead of night. I still had my living room light on, which would have been partly visible from the edges of my blinds. I was still up because stoner, and I think I just walked into my bedroom when I heard it. The softest, quietest, don't wake the neighbors knocking on my door. My gut fell out of my butt and I was rooted in one spot, looking unbelievably at my door, as he gently knocked 30, maybe 40 times continuously. It was ages before I was able to move, to think, or do anything. I called my boyfriend and told him in frantic whispers what was happening, and I think he told me that I should call the cops. I did so in a pathetic shaking voice and heard silence. Too scared to move closer, I stood frozen half in my bedroom and half in my living room for an eternity until I believed that he was gone. The next morning my boyfriend visited and dragged me over to my neighbor. She told us he was a really weird guy she invited over and then regretted, later kicking him out. She didn't go into details, but she was very concerned about him coming back to my door. My boyfriend made her text him and shared all the awful things that would happen to him if he ever knocked on my door again, which thankfully he never did. I'm a 24-year-old female. I've been reading through these types of stories for a few years now, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on something that happened to me. This is not the most exciting story you're going to hear, and I can't explain why it happened the way it did. I am also really stupid and lack common sense in this story. I'm sorry. I used to live in an old Victorian house in Maryland, and at the time of the story I was 10 years old. This house had been turned into a duplex that split the 2 floors and basically just rented them as apartments. I lived in the upstairs. There's a university nearby, so we had a lot of college students, and we also had a lot of drug issues in the area. People were always getting their houses searched or getting into fights over it. The owner of the house had told my family that the people who rented the upstairs previously had given him a lot of trouble, and he had kicked them out. My family had just moved there for my dad's new job, and didn't have a place to live yet, so we were thankful that their contract ended so early so that we could take their place. If there's anything else the owner told my parents, it was not shared with me. I was homeschooled online as a child, so my parents would leave for the day to go to work while I stayed in the apartment and did my schoolwork alone. Maybe about a week after we had moved in, there was this loud banging on the door. I ran down the side stairs to open it, and there was this tall, thick man dressed in black with a black mask over his whole face. The mask had holes for his eyes and mouth. As immensely stupid as this sounds, no alarm bells went off to me. This place was cold year-round, and I stupidly just assumed his gear happened to be black. Behind him, I remember seeing a car parked next to the building that was still running. He just stood there silently for a couple seconds, and I felt awkward, so I said, "Hi, can I help you with something?" He continued just to stand there for what felt like forever before saying something like, "I'm here for the mail." I'm smiling and saying something like, "Oh sure, you must have just moved out. My dad already brought all the mail this morning. Let me go see if there's anything." So I turned around, left the door wide open, and ran inside to find the mail pile. I looked through it, but I didn't see anything that didn't have my family's name on it. When I went back to tell him the bad news, he was gone, and so was the car. When my parents came home that evening, I told them that the previous renter had stopped by and asked for their mail. My dad had a fit and said that I shouldn't open the door while I was home alone, and apparently our mail comes from the owner since he separates it before bringing it up to each of the renter's box, since we have the same address. So we wouldn't have gotten any of the mail that doesn't belong to us anyways, and the previous renter would already know that. He was furious with me for being a moron, and that was before he thought to ask what they looked like. I described the black suit and mask. I know enough now that I handled the situation entirely wrong and am beyond stupid. I'm not looking to get berated for it. I would actually like to hear what you think. If this suspicious guy had malicious intentions, why didn't he do anything? I was home alone. It was morning, so my parents wouldn't have come back until that evening anyway. I don't even think the other renter was home. I clearly didn't suspect anything from him and left the door wide open while I turned my back to him and ran inside the house. I am immensely thankful that nothing happened to me. I don't ever want to appear as ungrateful that this didn't take an awful turn. I just don't understand what protected me if that was actually the case. It was the first weekend in May 1997 when this happened. At the time, I was a sophomore at a local, private 2-year college. Instead of living in the dorms, I lived at home, as our house was right next to campus, to the point that I was closer to a couple of my classes than students that lived in the dorms. Just to the south of our place was the overflow parking lot, which served both the church and the school. The school was about to embark on a remodeling project, where it had enough construction to warrant parking a tractor trailer in the overflow parking lot, basically perpendicular to my house. 2 of my best friends were heading home the next morning, one for Iowa and the other for Virginia. So we decided to spend the evening as best as we could by watching movies. This was before streaming services were even a thing. The college was a hotbed of activity as people were packing up to head home, with graduating sophomores getting ready for the ceremony in 2 days. As we were lounging in my living room, a couple girls we knew, one of which I was interested in, suddenly rang the doorbell, asking to come in to wash their hands as they had been on a walk. Their hands smelled funny. The girl I was digging, named KT, stuck her hands in my face, to which I recognized the distinct smell of shaving cream, so I knew something nefarious was afoot. We watched them leave via the dining room windows before I told the boys that they were up to something. So we left from the back door. These 2 girls had tried to trash my friend's room with shaving cream and toothpaste. Oh, it was game on. We ran into one of the boys' mod mates, an obnoxious guy who had no concept of boundaries. I made the point of never letting the guy, let's call him JB, know where I lived, as he was the type to just show up unannounced and not pick up on social cues when it was time to leave. The girls were hiding from a retribution, and even JB pledged his loyalty to help us. I told him to keep an eye out. We would be back. So we left him hanging in the common area under the girls' dorms. We slid back to my house, to which I told the boys to just be patient. The girls would be back. We set up, watching to the south from the darkened dining room, soon rewarded by seeing KT sneaking back towards the house. I told the boys the plan was to ambush her, so we crept out the back door. KT had disappeared behind the tractor trailer, as she was obscured from my view. But to our dismay, there was a black-clad figure laying on the ground, just around the corner from the trailer where Katie was hiding. My boys were next to me as I was cussing in whispers because I was 30 yards away from whom I thought was JB. He was laying with his head away from us, so he couldn't see us without turning his body as he stayed perfectly still. He might have been 10 feet from the corner of the trailer where KT was. After a brief discussion, I said it couldn't be helped, so we continued on with our plan to ambush and scare KT. The 3 of us quietly padded around the backside of the trailer to find KT on her stomach, intently watching our house, trying to see movements. She was actually way closer to where JB was lying, completely oblivious to the fact that he was actually within 5 feet of her. She never heard me as I crept up behind her, curled my hands into a claw before grabbing her as I snarled. Fetal position instantly from her, which prompted howling and laughter from my 2 friends and myself. She was petrified. I caught my breath long enough to wonder where JB was, as I thought he would have joined us by now. Looking around the corner, there was no one on the ground, but you could tell someone had been laying there, even in the darkness. One of the boys, TC, said that the black-clad figure jumped up and ran to the west. Odd, I thought, but JB was also a strange cat. After KT apologized for her early hijinks, and I had detailed what happened, our merry band made it back to the campus to keep our eyes on her. We ran into JB, to which I said, "Dude, why did you have to run off? You could have stayed." JB replied, I don't even know where you live." The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. It wasn't JB laying on the ground mere feet from KT. KT went white as a sheet, and all of us were suddenly creeped out by this random guy laying on the ground. It turns out during the summer, all around college, there were cases of houses being walked through with very little being taken, as if someone was casing houses, but no one was ever caught. I was in my room chilling at 3 a.m. when suddenly I heard someone calling my name from outside my window. Knowing no one would look for me at this hour, I naturally felt weird about it. So when I looked out the window and no one was to be seen against my better judgment, I decided to go down to smoke to see who it was. When I got down, I heard the same voice offering me a light and asking for a cigarette. I looked to where the voice was coming from. Standing there was a man who looked to be in his 50s. Weirded out, I asked, "Who are you?" He didn't answer and just said that he hadn't seen me in a while, and then asked when I was going to go back to base. I didn't answer and asked again who he was. He just stared blankly at me. I asked again and he tried to grab my arm while telling me to say happy birthday to my brother. After that, he just started walking away while saying I needed to clean my room since I leave in a few days. Mind you, I never told him when I leave, and my apartment was on the 10th floor, and the window is almost never open. Just a weird encounter. This happened a few weeks ago, however, scared the crap out of me, and I learned something new about my home. I was off work and inside for the day. There were several knocks and the person kept ringing the doorbell, so I eventually answered, though I wasn't expecting anyone. I also live in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, with only one neighbor nearby. A mid-30s man, seemingly having Down syndrome, parked at the very edge of my driveway, on the road, which alarmed me. He asked me questions about knowing anyone who used to live here. He asked if I was in high school, and how old I was, and if I was home alone. My fiance has 2 cars, so thankfully, it looked like I was not alone, and I told him no and no. He seemed scared off and ran to his car and sped off. Afterwards, I went to my neighbors and inquired about the previous owners and the man. They told me that there was an elderly couple with a son with a disability, and the couple had hung themselves in the house. So double mind blown at this point, and I'm scared to even answer my front door again. I received a knock on my back door around 1 a.m. They tried about 3 times before giving up. Someone coming to my back door is quite rare and would only happen if it was the landlord or my brother. My girlfriend has a key and wouldn't need to knock. None of the former would knock on my door at that hour. I didn't answer, mostly out of general annoyance. Flash forward to today, 2 days later. My girlfriend had just parked in the lot, and I opened my back door for the first time since hearing the knocks. I saw some purple flowers in plastic wrapping that had been wilted due to the heavy rain and snow over the past couple days. It was unmarked and has no note attached to it. I immediately assumed the visitor was someone who had delivered flowers from my girlfriend. I had flowers delivered to her just a week ago, so I assumed she did it too. I had felt bad that I had let them wilt in the rain and profusely apologized to her when she came through the door. The flowers were not from her, and the 1 a.m. visitor remains unexplained. If a family member sent them, they would have called to ask if I got it, and I doubt anyone is stalking me, a guy in his mid-30s. Any ideas what this could be? I just found it unsettling. I'm a 16-year-old female, so about 2 years ago I was home with my mom. It was just the 2 of us. Now, my mom at the time was addicted to drugs and alcohol and was basically in a drug-induced coma. Nothing could wake her up. I had decided to take a bath while she slept. My bathroom door was locked, as was my mother's bedroom door, as she seemed to think we didn't know about her addictions and kept it locked so we didn't find out. The house was silent. I had only been in the bath for a half an hour before I heard the front door open. I assumed it was my elder sister coming back from work, as no one else would have just walked in. But I wanted to be sure, so I texted her. I immediately got a worried text back saying, "No, I'm not home. Why? Was someone there?" I froze. I could hear the footsteps. Now, our house was small, 1 story, and from the front door to the bathroom door was only a small living room. I heard a weird scraping noise coming from the hallway to the bathroom. I heard the scraping sound stop outside the bathroom door, and then someone grabbed the doorknob. They turned it very slowly from side to side for about a minute. The entire time I was silent, still frozen, and shaking like a leaf. I wanted to call my mom, but I didn't want whoever it was to hear the sound and get to my mom. After a while, I didn't hear anything. I stayed in the bath for what I think was an hour, till I heard the front door open and then click shut softly. I stayed in the bath long after the water had gone cold, until I heard my sister come in. She yelled if I was there and if I was okay, and why the door was unlocked. I got out of the bath and heard her gasp before I had come out, but when I did, I swear my blood went cold. There was a line spanning the wall of the hallway. The paint had been cut out, like someone had trailed something sharp along the wall. Currently, the theory of the scraping noise I heard was someone trailing a knife on the wall. This was a few years ago in my old house, around Halloween. I'm a 43-year-old male. One day, I was home alone in my house. I have a wife, 3 kids, and a dog. I'm in the basement cutting wood and working when all of a sudden I hear a thump on the ceiling above me, which is the first level floor. It's rhythmic and almost perfect in beat. I'm a handyman and do a lot of my own fixing and know the unusual sound houses make. This was not usual. I started following the thumping around the first floor. It's as if something is walking around. I call out my wife's name, no answer. My kids, no answer. Just soft moaning and thumps that are both getting louder. My dog is in the basement with me and following the sound with me with its tail straight up, completely silent. This is weird because I have a loud, jumpy dog. I then slowly follow the thumping to the steps. I hear a weak old woman's voice calling for Jimmy, and she's calling it over and over again. Ignoring my hellos, she keeps walking around the first floor, calling out, moaning, and thumping. I grab my dog by the collar and leave out the basement door and walk around the outside of my house. I go up the street and there's this younger couple calling out for someone. Let's say Nancy for the sake of this. I go up to them and say, "Are you Jimmy?" The young guy looks at me in relief and confusion crossed on his face. He tells me that that's his dad's name, but he passed away years ago. Turns out Nancy was his mom with some kind of mental issue. She had snuck out of the house up the road. Her family lived in my house before we did not know that, and she was having some kind of episode where she went looking for her husband in her home. She also had a wooden leg. Don't know the story, but that was a thumping. We got her home safely, and now I double check my locks from that point on. This happened pretty much an hour ago. I was pulling up to my house with my mom when she says, "Who is at our house?" Me, being confused, looked at our yard. Then I see someone walking up towards us. My mom says he was trying to open the door to get in. The encounter went like this. "Hey, I just lost my job and was looking for some work. Could you help?" My mom replied with something that I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure she said no because of what he's about to ask. "Could you spare a few dollars?" Wanting to get rid of him, my mom said, "Sure, if you can come to this side, I can give you a couple bucks." "Thank you." My mom gives him some money. They start to talk about how he should take it as a blessing and pass it on to someone else. He says my mom is an angel. Then they start to talk about other things I can't remember right now. Then the man disappears. My mom starts to drive around to find the man to make sure he left, as she understandably didn't feel safe getting out. We start to drive around. She calls her boyfriend and my dad. Then there's a cop on the side of the road. "Hey, there's a middle-aged man on my doorstep with the screen door open." Then he walked up to my car and asked for work at this time of night, which I found suspicious. He asked me for money and I gave him some money. "Where do you live?" My mom tells the cop and he says, "Okay, I'll follow you there." We drive back home. He inspects the front door and backyard, but there's no one. we decided it's safe to go back in. My mom's boyfriend is currently at our house right now, and I'm shaking. Edit, I just talked to my mom. She said he could have been drunk and at the wrong house as it was St. Patrick's Day, and people do like to get drunk on that day, even when they aren't Irish. But I highly doubt that, as I find it weird that as soon as he saw us pulling up, he came over to our car with a sob story. Take this information as you will, though. I've been seeing this young man who appears to be homeless in the park across the street from my house for the past few days. He must be new to this area because I had never seen him before, and I frequent this park with my dog at least 3 to 5 times a day. He has some odd tendencies like sleeping in random and odd areas of the park, such as next to a busy sidewalk and in landscaping. Tonight, while walking to my car, I see that he has entered our small 20-apartment gated complex and is hanging out at the bottom of my stairs that is leading to my parking spot. No idea how he got in there, other than he followed someone in as a pedestrian through the locked gates that you have to enter a code for. I get in my car as fast as possible. I grab some dinner and about 20 minutes later, I come home and don't see him around anymore. I quickly walk up my step and glance around while getting my key in the lock to see that he had followed me up the stairs and was watching me from about 3 to 4 feet back. I was visibly startled when seeing him and said hello or something while turning my key and going inside, locking the door as fast as I could. This happened about 30 minutes ago, still shaking from the creepiness. This took place a couple years ago in Hollywood, Florida. I was in middle school at the time. My sister, mom, and I were at our front porch unlocking the door after coming home from school. We know something was off right away because our alarm didn't go off. My mom has always made it a point to set the alarm before she would leave the house. Although that was weird, we just commented about it. It was very possible that she had just forgot to set it. Because of that possibility, we just ignored it and moved on. As we entered the house, we began to set our backpacks and other stuff down. I heard the drawer close in my bedroom. I thought I was hearing things, so I looked at my mom and was about to ask her if she heard something. My mom looked at me at the same time, and her look of horror was enough for me to realize that she had heard the same thing. My sister didn't notice because she had her earphones in. That sound and the fact that the alarm was off was enough for my mom to decide to get us out of there. She loudly said, "I want to show you something in the backyard." But she didn't want anyone in the house to know that we were onto them, and that's why we were leaving the house. My sister looked confused, but I knew exactly why my mom said this. As we entered the backyard and shut the door behind us, we sped walked towards the alley behind our house. The only thing that separated us from it was a wooden fence. Once we reached the fence, we opened the gate and began to exit into the alley. I was the last one through the gate, and before I shut it, I looked at the house for the last time. To my horror, I saw someone looking at me through our curtains. We called the police and they found no one, and nothing was stolen. I never told anyone about what I saw. I was about 12 or 13. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and my dad worked nights. My parents were separated, so I was at my dad's place. I had done homework, and once it got really late, I got into my pajamas. I checked my doors and on my younger sister. She was asleep, and I stayed up watching TV. I heard a knock at the front door. I had a dog. He begins to bark and runs to the back. It's just a little past midnight at this point. No one should be there. I decided to stay quiet. There were 2 windows I could look out of, but I decided not to. This was probably a good thing, because there were knocks on that window too. Once that happened, I called my dad. Honestly, I should have called the police, but I was scared. I was near one of them, and I could hear footsteps and voices. I didn't hear a word they said because I was freaking out, and I moved away. I went to the back door to make sure it was locked, and it was. Once I turned away, however, there were knocks. My dog stands by it and barks more. My dad tells me to check on my sister, and she's still sleeping. I finally decided to peek outside and see a truck. and it's just sitting there. My dad told me I'll be okay, and soon after, he sent my grandfather over. He sat me for a while before going home. Now, in the morning, my sister told me she didn't hear anything. To be fair, I did close her bedroom door. I'm also glad the entire house was locked up. I wouldn't find out until a couple weeks later that the house next door was broken into. We literally had the police come over to our house and ask if we heard anything. We hadn't. My dad later moved into a bigger house, and that was that. This only happened a few hours ago, so I'm shaken, but it's too early in the morning to phone and wake up my friends. I need to talk to someone and get this out. I'm so creeped out and concerned, so I thought about coming here. Brief setting and context. I'm a woman in my 30s caring for my elderly parents, so I'm staying in my downstairs room in my childhood home at the moment. The window faces the main street, which is an average residential street in a fairly quiet area. The bed faces the window. I often have that window open at night since I need to be cool to sleep, and haven't worried about it since there's a cabinet and aquarium in front of the window area, not blocking the window from view, and I could reach to open and close it, but it would make it difficult for someone to climb in. My dog, Sable, also sleeps in the room with me. While she's a sweet-natured, medium-sized dog who doesn't look the least bit threatening, she's a fantastic guard dog in that she's always alert to any noises and will stand her ground and bark and growl if she senses a threat, so I've never really worried about the open window. After tonight, I won't be able to leave it open again. It started at maybe 3:30 to 4 a.m. sometime. I was awake. Since I care for my parents, I often have disrupted sleep patterns, and I'm awake at odd hours. I was reading a book when I heard Sable growl, low and deep. Then she jumped off the bed and began to pace a bit, looking up at the window before jumping at the cabinet by the window, barking. I shouted, "Hey, we're calling the police. Dog will bite," just in case there was someone out there. I went to look at the curtains to the side. I didn't see anything. I pulled the curtains closed again and made sure to pull the right curtain over, then drew the left curtain, the one that covers the open part of the window, all the way over, covering the right curtain too, tucking it so the wind wouldn't be able to move it. I really wasn't alarmed then. It was a fairly quiet residential street, but there are foxes around that we sometimes hear, and occasionally someone passing by our neighbor's gate next to the door will make Sable growl or bark. But she doesn't usually react the way she did this time. She usually growl, but stay in bed, and her reaction was much stronger than normal. I thought that if it was someone scoping out our window to potentially burgle, they would have now seen the room was occupied by a person and a dog and would find an easier target, but I mainly guessed it was just some random noise she heard outside. I was wrong. A good half hour later, after I relaxed and thought I might doze off soon, I heard her growl again, a really serious, deep, and low growl, and I listened, again thinking it might be foxes or something, but I heard what sounded like deep, horror movie breathing sounds, like the heavy breathing sounds a pervert makes on the phone to his stalking victim in a film. I sat up, looked out the window, and my heart stopped. The curtain had been pulled back, lifted from the bottom, like someone was peeking underneath it, and I could still hear the heavy breathing. I shouted, "Hey," and moved from the bed to the side of the window so I could see past the curtain. I saw a figure of a man moving away from the window to the right, towards the front door and exit the front garden. Too dark to make out any features or clothing. It was just a dark male figure. Shakingly, I immediately thought that since I knew he moved away and it wasn't at or under our window, I reached and pulled it shut, grabbed my phone and called the emergency services. One thing that creeped me out, in hindsight, is that it would have taken me a few seconds to move from my bed to the side of the window, and that was after I shouted and he knew that he had been seen, but he must have stayed there even knowing that I had seen him, until I pulled the curtain and could see out, then he moved away. The heavy breathing was so deliberate, it was so loud, like someone was trying to frighten me. While on the phone with the police, I went around the ground floor of the house, turning the lights on, making sure the rest of the house was secure, and it was. I'm very careful to lock all the doors and windows at night, and everything looked undisturbed. 2 patrol officers came shortly before 5 a.m. and took their report. They suggested asking the neighbor if they had camera footage and to let them know that there's a prowler in the area. The cops went to drive around the area, saying that they'd be wanting to know what someone was doing wandering around at 5 a.m. Anyway, since the dark meant I only saw the shape of the person, I had no real description. I doubt they could do much. I couldn't even be 100% certain it was a man, but the breathing and the figure I saw instantly made me think male, and the outline of his head looked smooth. So either he was bald or wearing a tight cap, and the height would have been average, 5'8" to 5'10". I was still shaken, but feeling angry and violated, and wishing we had a camera system now. We'll be looking into that. I never thought anything like this would happen. Don't have any enemies, no recent exes, no one I know of harboring any grudges. Since I'm caring for my folks full time now, I'm not out socializing or making any enemies, nor are my elderly or disabled parents. I'm at the wrong side of 35 and living in jeans, joggers, and t-shirts, no makeup or fussing with my hair most of the time, so not a likely target for a peeping Tom. If it wasn't for the fact that it was my dog who alerted me to something both times, I'd wonder whether I was half asleep and dreamt it. I have had hallucinations once as a result to a bad reaction to antidepressants. That was more than a decade ago. Hasn't happened before or since, and I learned how to test my reality in times I was worried about whether something was really happening or not. I have to think it was someone who was looking to burgle our house. But for the fact that they came back so much later, maybe someone was on drugs or having a mental health episode. Or, and this one bothers me most, someone who wanted to scare me. But why? Who? They know where I live. Are they gonna come back? New fears keep popping into my mind. Like most nights, I'm up at some point late at night or very early in the morning, and will let the dog outside into the back garden for a quick pee. And I'm suddenly aware of how easy it would be to be attacked, and the person gaining entry then. There's a passage around the side of the house that goes from the front to the back garden with only a very small side gate, meant to keep the dog confined, not designed to keep others out. It would be easy for someone to access, then hide against the back of the house, completely hidden from view. They were bold enough to come back a second time, even knowing a person and a dog were in the room, perhaps hoping I would have fallen asleep again. They seemed to be trying to deliberately scare me when they returned the second time, doing the deep breathing noise, and stayed by the window even after I shouted. In those few seconds it would have taken me from the shout out until I reached the window and could move the curtains out of the way. They could have moved and been long out of sight, but they stayed there until there was a chance I could see them, only then moving away. The breathing noises and then the coldness ran through me when I actually saw the man moving away from the window will always haunt me, along with the questions of their motives. Were they trying to scare me? Why? What's to stop them from coming back? Back when I was in 6th grade, I had a close-knit group of friends. There were 4 of us, and we were all girls, and we hung out all the time. Sleepovers were the norm for us, and we usually rotated houses, seeing that all our parents knew each other and we all lived relatively close to each other, the furthest being about 10 minutes away. One particular sleepover, we were at my friend Caitlin's house, and 2 of her cousins just happened to also be sleeping over. Caitlin had 2 sisters and an older brother that were really nice and friendly. During our sleepovers, they usually just stayed in their rooms and would only come out for food, so we never really felt like we were imposing on them. Her brother would sometimes let us play with his PS2, and his sisters would talk to us about boys and high school gossip, which at the time we thought was really cool. Overall, Caitlin had a really great relationship with her siblings. I couldn't say the same for her cousins though. One of her cousins was in 8th grade, and she was closer in age to one of Caitlin's older sisters, who was a freshman in high school, so she was staying in her room. The other cousin was a boy who was a junior in high school, and naturally he stayed in Caitlin's brother's room. The girl was nice but seemed a bit shy. The guy, however, just gave me the creeps. He was definitely more outgoing, but something about his mannerisms was strange, and when he smiled, it looked like he was smiling about something he thought in his head, and not necessarily at you. He had shoulder-length, stringy and greasy hair that was dirty blonde, and was pretty scrawny for a guy's age. He looked like he could be a freshman in high school. Caitlin really seemed uncomfortable around him. Later on, we were in Caitlin's room. She told us that she just recently met her cousins because their mom and her mom had a falling out years before and weren't talking to each other. They recently reconnected, so they thought it would be a good idea for Caitlin's aunt and her children to come visit for a weekend. Caitlin said that her female cousin was really nice, but that she thought the guy was weird. Ever since he got to the house, he's been trying to hang out with her instead of her brother. He would go into her room and go through her toys and books, trying to make conversation with her. He was also kind of touchy. He would pet her cheeks and her hair. When she would flinch or move away from him, he would get this really cold look in his eyes, and he would stare at her for a few seconds before smiling, that creepy smile he does. We all agreed that it was really weird, but eventually moved on to other things and talked about the usual stuff 6th graders talk about. We ended up watching a movie before bed and took our turns going to the bathroom in the hallway that Caitlin shared with one of her sisters to brush her teeth. The oldest sister had her own bathroom in her room. Everyone called dibs on their turn, and since I didn't really care, I was the last one to go there. When my friend Lucia came back and told me that she was done, I was relieved because I was getting antsy and tired and just wanted to brush my teeth, lay in bed, and gossip until we fell asleep. I walked down the hallway and opened the door to the bathroom. I was so distracted I didn't even notice Caitlin's cousin in the bathroom until I turned the lights on. I quickly apologized and closed the door. At that point, I was just about to leave and run back to the room. He was in the freaking bathroom with the lights off. From what I could see before I shut the door, he was sitting on top of the closed toilet. Before I could leave, he opened the door, smiled at me, and told me to go ahead. I didn't really care about brushing my teeth at that point, but I didn't want to run away and provoke a reaction out of him. I entered the bathroom and immediately locked the door behind me. I quickly brushed my teeth and did my business. This is when things really got creepy for me. I opened the door and he was still standing there, waiting with a smile on his face. "Let me walk you back to your room." I didn't even know what to say to that. I guess he took my silence as a yes, because before I knew it, he grabbed my right hand and was walking me back to Caitlin's room. His hands were warm and sweaty, even though he didn't look like he was sweating or remotely warm. I felt so numb, and I could hear my own breathing. I honestly felt like I was going to pass out. I swear that hallway has never felt so long. When I got to the room, he let go of my hand and said goodnight, going back to the bedroom he was staying in, which we passed before we got to Caitlin's room. I walked back inside and I guess I was making a face because all my friends came up to me and asked me what was wrong. I told them what happened and they all agreed that it was super weird, and Caitlin said she would talk to her mom in the morning. I was hoping it would end there, but it didn't. As a rule, we weren't allowed to lock doors during sleepovers. It's usually fine, but not in this instance. I had to have been sleeping for a few hours when Caitlin was shaking me awake. Apparently, she had been up for a while, and with me being the closest to her, I was the first one she ran to. She then told me, with her voice shaking, that her cousin had opened the door twice to her room and would stare in the room for almost a full minute before quietly closing the door. I was really frightened when I heard this. He was just watching us sleep throughout the night. I agreed to jump into Caitlin's bed with her and waited. It didn't even take that long when I heard the door open. Both of us just froze and stared straight at the door. There was no light in the hallway, so the only source of light in that room was from the moon outside, but we could still see a silhouette of someone's head peeking in through the door. We could feel his eyes on us, and he was just staring into the darkness of Caitlin's room for a few seconds. We were trying not to move so that he didn't know we were awake, but it didn't matter. He let some air out of his nose as if he was trying not to laugh. "Hey, Caitlin," he whispered, and then just closed the door. Caitlin looked like she wanted to cry. She grabbed onto me and we just held each other and waited until he decided to come back. He never ended up coming back though. I guess it wasn't as fun since he knew we were awake. We never ended up going back to sleep that night though. The next day, my mom came to get me pretty early, and I said my goodbyes. I was glad Caitlin's cousin was still asleep. When I saw Caitlin in school, I asked her what happened when I left. She said she told her mom, and her mom was really concerned and said she would talk to the aunt. I guess she told my mom about what happened to me too, because she asked me about it later on and was prying to see if anything else happened to me. After that, she made sure that Caitlin's cousins were not around before allowing me to sleep over at their place. She didn't have to worry though, because they never came back to visit after that. I don't know if Caitlin's mom had another falling out with her sister, or if she just never invited them back to the house, but Caitlin's creepy cousin, let's not meet ever again. This story took place in early 2017. I had recently moved from a major city to a small town in the Midwest to get myself together and separate myself from bad habits I had developed. Previously, I had been living on the West Coast and worked for a couple who were pot farmers, just trimming their weed for one season, with a few other trimmers. Nothing major stuck out to me other than the guy, who was in his mid-30s, was a major asshole and super protective of his weed. His girlfriend was someone I wouldn't normally get along with, but she was alright. So I trimmed their weed for that season, and they paid me a portion up front. He said the rest would come after they sold a few pounds or whatever, because that's just how the business went. They did end up paying me within a few weeks, so all was good with me. However, the man here kept texting me after I moved mid-country with random, "Hey, how are you doing?" I never liked the guy, got bad vibes from the get-go, but his girlfriend was a friend of a close friend, so I sort of gave them the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, the girlfriend started messaging me via text nearing spring after I had worked for them trimming their weed that fall season, asking if I would be available to house sit for them while they were on vacation out of the country. At this point, I was living in Colorado and the farm was in California. I did not have a permanent job set up yet, and they were offering good money to house sit, plus make some extra money trimming weed that they had left over from the season. Stupidly, I drove my ass 17 hours with dollar signs in my eyes, and all was hell from there. They lived in a full house with a gardener's quarters attached to their main house. There's one bedroom and one bathroom, an electric stove, kettle, kitchen area in the gardener's bedroom. There is also a doorway from this area into the main house, blocked by a bookshelf on my side. When they invited me to stay in house sit, they were there for 2 or 3 days, and part of their stay included drilling the door shut on the opposite side so that I could not enter their house. But that didn't bother me, and I honestly understood why they would want to lock up their house, but things got really freaking weird afterwards. I had been there alone for a few days, trimming, walking the dogs, filling the hummingbird feeders, watching the house like I was supposed to. The girlfriend would call from Morocco every so often to check up on me. I thought everything was fine until I started hearing water running from the kitchen inside of the house, the part of the house that I had no access to, but was directly connected to. I immediately called the couple and told them that I could hear someone in their house. Their response was literally, "It's none of your concern what you hear on the other side of the wall." This turned my stomach. I was in the middle of nowhere, locked by a gate on their property, hired to house it, and all of a sudden it was not my concern if someone was inside their place. It freaked me out. I still had 2 more weeks to be at this place, and I was properly freaked the fuck out. Over the next few days, I would feel scared and calm in waves. At one point, I was sitting outside with the dogs, and they ran up to the side of the house, wagging their tails like they were greeting someone, and I heard a very quiet shh, and then footsteps patter off. I continued to hear the TV, microwave, water running from the main part of the house. The language the girlfriend was using with me via text was too personal in regard to what I was doing. I mean, sure, they could have had a camera installed, although I searched the room for any devices, but the sounds and even the dog reacting to what I heard was enough for me. Once I realized that I was house sitting, but also being spied on in some weird way, I started to have fun with it. I don't know if I figured that I was going to die anyway, Or maybe if I acted crazy enough, they wouldn't want me for whatever their purpose was. But one night, I was out on the small porch steps having a very late cigarette. It had to be close to midnight, and I could hear someone walking around the perimeter of the house. So I stood up, opened the door to the gardener's quarters, and closed the door, as if I had walked back inside. But in reality, I just opened the door and closed it, keeping my position with a cigarette on the porch. Immediately, someone walked from the side of the house because they thought I was inside. They noticed me and ran into the woods. In my mind, I set a teeny trap to see if I was delusional, and it had proved that I wasn't. So I started doing crazy dumb stuff because I was alone. Nothing too wild. I just blasted Backstreet Boys, set their garage cans up like a drum set, and walked around topless. Honestly, I thought if these people were crazy enough to be fucking watching me while I house it for them, I had to do something more ridiculous to push them away. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but I can't help but reference the Hey Arnold episode where the bully is after him and he says, "Don't hit me, I'll hit me, I'm crazy." Anyway, the couple finally came back to their house from Morocco and acted like they didn't want to pay me. They did after some pulling and tugging, but fuck. Don't ever go house sit and not really know the people you're house sitting for in the Emerald Triangle. Or just don't even go there. It's really shady business. It was about 2 years ago on a very hot night. It's very safe where I live, and I went to buy some stuff at a supermarket at dusk. When I left the shop, it was quite dark. It gets dark suddenly in the tropics. It's only about a 5-minute walk home, but I was feeling uneasy. I kept stopping and turning to look behind me. Nobody, but the road was dimly lit and there were a lot of bushes, easy for someone to hide. I kept walking with this gnawing sense of unease, and I still kept looking behind me. I gratefully reached home, put it out of mind, cooked dinner, watched TV, etc. About midnight, I went to lay down on my bed. I'm an insomniac, so I just lay there with the lights on, and I started to read. I heard a creaking sound above my head. My bedroom window makes a lot of noise, but I was too scared to look. Nothing happened. However, I am now on high alert. Moments later, I heard a smashing noise in the kitchen. I froze. My bedroom door was open, and as I said, the light was on. I heard some noises in the living room and pretended to be asleep. After a short time, I heard the click of the front door being opened. Someone had let themselves out. This was around 2:30 a.m. 2:45 a.m. I'm convinced that I'm alone, and I called the police. 3:15 a.m. I called them again. 3:45 a.m. I rang them again. They told me that they only had 2 officers that night, and that they were busy. 4:20 a.m. they arrived and asked me what the problem was. I rattled off my story. They didn't even bother to look at the broken window. All they said was, "It does sound suspicious," and then left. As it stood, the person had taken my bag from my chair in my room, and yes, it had quite a bit of money in it, as I was planning to buy some furniture. I do believe that someone noticed me in the supermarket that night, followed me home, checked my bedroom window to see if I was asleep, then did their deed. I thank God that I wasn't harmed in any way. Even if I somehow managed to call the cops, screaming and begging for help, no one would have cared. So grateful I'm here, unharmed and alive. I live in a remote mountain area. About 9 years ago, I was sitting at my computer at 2 a.m. when the side door got kicked in. The local meth head came through the door, pulling a revolver out of his shoulder holster. I picked up my Colt 44, cowboy gun, that I kept on my desk and put a slug right through his belly button from across the house. He fell outside so he didn't bleed in my house. I shot him there because I didn't want to kill him, but I knew from training that an abdominal shot was the most painful. A deputy and ambulance arrived about 45 minutes later. The deputy commented on my marksmanship, admired my gun, made in 1871, wrote a report and left. 6 months later, he died from a meth-induced heart attack. Good riddance. When I was 26, my parents were on holiday. I went over to their house every day to feed the cat. One Friday, my husband was away doing a gig, so I waited until he left before going to the house. I got there around 6 p.m. The area that my parents lived was not a good one. There was a very large council estate right next to where they lived. Due to all the attempted break-ins, every internal door in the house could be locked. The doors were all heavy and inset into deep frames. I unlocked the front door, then unlocked the door leading into the kitchen. As I opened it, I noticed the drawers were opened and there was stuff all over the floor. I heard movement, so I quickly relocked the door before letting myself into the living room and calling the police. I explained that I was in the house. The burglar was still in the house with me. They said that they would send someone over as soon as they could. An hour later, I rang again. I was so frightened if they were still in the kitchen. I sat there with a pair of scissors in my hand, not sure what I was planning to do with them, but they made me feel a bit safer. It was about 2.5 hours later when the police finally arrived. It turned out the burglar had removed the kitchen window and frame. The police reckoned it would have been very noisy and would have taken a while. They said forensics would have to come to take the fingerprints, but that they were currently very busy. It took 2 days for forensics to come by, and it had rained heavily in the meantime, so forensics didn't get anything useful. This happened nearly 30 years ago. The burglar was never caught, but the large council estate has been pulled down, and there's much less antisocial behavior. This happened back in 2008, and to this day, I don't know if the person who broke in fully realizes how close she came to losing her life. In 2008, when I was 37, I had moved back home to take care of my dying mother, and stayed there after she passed. It was a fairly small country town, and the house was in a rural area, very low crime rate, and I can't even remember if I locked the doors during the daytime if someone was home. It was a fairly large ranch-style house, with my room being at the very back and my dad's on the other side of the house. My father was a pastor for our church. One Sunday morning I was really tired and just didn't feel like going. My pops left and I was enjoying laying in bed watching TV on super low volume with my eyes closed. About 30 minutes later I heard noises from the other side of the house that just weren't quite right. I lay there super still for a few seconds, just listening, trying to figure out what the noise was, and then heard quiet footsteps. It hit me that someone was there that shouldn't be. We've always had a few firearms in the house for personal protection, for scenarios just like this. I got my loaded .45 from my nightstand and very quickly made my way through the house. Then I was finally able to see there was someone in my dad's room. His dresser had a cabinet-type door on it, and they were open. In a fast second, I saw 2 legs of someone bent over going through his stuff. My gun was drawn down and aimed with my finger on the trigger. When the intruder's head popped out, overlooking the doors. Not knowing what to expect, I was ready to fire, but I recognized the face. It was the gal that cleaned our house off and on, and her husband was a nice guy from our church. Turns out she had a drug problem, and she knew that my dad had pain meds in his dresser from when he broke his hip. I yelled so loudly at her, "What do you think you're doing? Do you know how close you just came to getting shot?" She gave me some lame story and excuse about her being in the area, and that she had to pee so she came to our house, thought we were at church. But she also needed a t-shirt, so she came looking for one of my dad's, and she knocked my dad's pill bottle over by accident. Yeah, okay, makes no sense whatsoever. I told her again that she almost got killed, that I was told to never point a gun at anything if I didn't intend on killing it, and that this gun was pointed right at her. She was damn lucky that I recognized her in that split second. She kept apologizing and begging me not to call the cops or tell her husband. I told her to get out of my house. She left in tears and I sat on the couch trying to process everything that just happened. It was scary and infuriating at the same time, and just left me with a crappy feeling. I told my dad when he got home, He was not happy for sure, but he had a meeting with her. Apparently, she admitted to everything and her problem, admitted to her husband a few days later, and went to rehab. I was living in Cape Cod year-round in a house that had been converted to 3 apartments. Because this was such a popular vacation destination, parking was at a premium. My apartment had 5 spaces, 1 for me, 2 for the mother and daughter who lived in the downstairs portion of the house, and 2 people who lived in the upstairs in the front. I was in the upstairs rear by the parking. One night I get home to find a party raging in the rental house next door. A common occurrence in the summer, as almost all these houses in the neighborhood were summer rentals. I see that both my downstairs neighbors are home, and one of my upstairs neighbors was home. However, a strange car was parked in one of the spaces. I parked in my usual space and went upstairs. I later looked out the window to find that one of my neighbors had returned and parked behind the strange car, boxing it in. About 2 in the morning, I was asleep when I heard something wrong. I realized I hear boots coming across the stairs into my apartment. The downstairs door was locked, but it had to be closed in a very specific way or the lock didn't catch. I had never reported this as I live in a very safe, upscale area. A lesson I have now learned. I honestly didn't think this was real until I saw the cat run and dive under the bed and realized that someone was definitely in my apartment. This was a large studio apartment, so there was only one L-shaped room and nowhere to hide. It's interesting because you can plan on how you would act in the moment, but when it actually happens, everything is just instincts. I just pulled the covers over me and said, "Hello?" I literally greeted the intruder politely. He started yelling incoherently, and he bumped into the table and knocked over a vase. I got my phone and was trying to decide if I should run past him into the bathroom and lock myself in when I heard someone else running upstairs. The guy yelling, I'm sorry, he's drunk and got away from me." The second guy started dragging the first guy out, but then asked me if I could move my car because he was blocking them in. I told him that it's not my car, it was from the front apartment. They leave, and I heard them walk around front and pound on the door. I then hear a very heated argument, which ends with the police being called. I talked to my neighbor the next day, and he was fuming. He called the rental company that handled most of the houses in the neighborhood, and from then on, renters were told that they would be towed if they used our parking area. After it was all over, it surprised me how long it took me to stop shaking. Even though it wasn't a dangerous situation, my adrenaline levels didn't know that. And just so you're aware, I never walked up the stairs without double checking that lock ever again. I wasn't home alone, but I was a kid and asleep. Our house had 2 stories. The first story was the main house, and the second story had been built above the separated garage. Between them, a set of doors had been built and enclosed so that you would have to walk under the stairs to walk in between the 2 buildings. You had to be careful to stay on the garage side of the passageway so you didn't hit your head because you were passing under the slope of stairs. Our backyard was fenced and a gate from the driveway led to the passageway under the stairs. Our normal way to get into the house was not from the front door. We would get out of the car, go through the gate, greet our dog, go under the passageway, then turn left into the kitchen door. My dad was the sheriff's deputy, so the front door was bolted and chained, and the kitchen door always had a bolt. But because he was a cautious man, my dad never wanted us to accidentally get locked out of the house, so he hid a spare key in the freezer in the garage. We were strongly cautioned never to tell anyone about the key or let them see us use it. Although we spent most of our time downstairs during the day, we all slept upstairs at night. My bedroom was the furthest from the stairs. One night I was dead asleep and suddenly I jolted awake. Something had run across my hand. I ran out of my room. "Mom, Dad, a rat just ran across my bed." They were instantly awake and we all went back into my room to see what it was. There, sitting on my pillow, was my brother's hamster. His cage was downstairs. How did he get up there? My brother swore he had locked the cage before he went to bed, but here the hamster was. He picked up the hamster, and we all went downstairs to see what happened, except for my sister, who just went back to bed. Sure enough, the cage in the living room was open. We put him back and closed the cage door. Suddenly, my mom had a funny look on her face. Why is the kitchen light on? My dad put his hand out to tell us to stay back, then crept into the kitchen. He yelled back to us, "The back door is open." At that moment, my sister came flying downstairs. Someone just ran out of the gate. She had heard the gate slam. My dad bolted out the door to catch whoever it was, but they were long gone already. None of us slept for the next hour, trying to figure out what had happened. My parents probably didn't sleep all night after reclosing and locking the kitchen door and putting us back to bed. The best we can figure is one of us somehow let someone know about the key, although all of us denied it. The person had been at our house before because the dog hadn't barked. Maybe it was a kid because nothing was stolen and the hamster cage was open. We never did figure out. Needless to say, my dad moved the key to another hiding place. I was house and dog sitting for my sister when I took her dog Bailey out back for the last time before heading to bed. My sister's house is a townhouse that's connected on both sides in a long line of townhomes. In the back was a long, fairly narrow strip of grass running along the homes, then a large field with long grass and weeds. So, condos, grass, then field, no fence or any structures for about a mile. I was enjoying the evening air. It was probably around 10:30 p.m. and was completely dark outside. Not feeling weary of anything at all. All was quiet except for Bailey. After about 2 minutes, when Bailey had done her business, I called her back and went inside. Out of habit, I immediately locked the door behind me. We walked across the room to go upstairs, with Bailey right ahead of me. Right as I walked behind the wall that separated the view from our back door, I heard the doorknob jiggle. I froze. Doorknob jiggled again. I waited a few more seconds just so I could be 100% sure, and I heard a definite sound of the metal jiggling and someone trying to get inside. I bolted upstairs, where Bailey already was, still completely unaware of the situation. I hid in the closet and called the police. They showed up a while later, searched the area and couldn't find anything, and told me that it was probably someone who was actually trying to get into a home a few houses down that was having a party. Most likely an honest mistake. They treated me nicely, but they clearly thought I was just a scared girl who was overthinking things from being alone in the house. They left, and my brother and his friends drove an hour and a half so they could stay the night with me. If I had been who I am now, I probably would have given the police at least a little pushback. I don't think they could have done much past searching the area they did, but I would have told them that they were wrong. It was not an honest mistake. Someone was definitely trying to get into the house after they saw me out there alone. The fact that I was a 19-year-old, 100-pound girl by myself with a very sweet but very dumb and not intimidating dog at all. I was outside there for a long enough time that if someone was nearby me, they would have been intentionally keeping themselves quiet. It took me about 10 seconds to cross the room out of view after coming back inside. That means the person had to be close enough to me and almost definitely watching me when I crossed behind the wall out of view to try to open the door within 10 seconds. I can't imagine that someone sees a small woman by herself, doesn't make themselves known, and tries to follow her back inside the home has pure intentions. I look back and just cringe at what could have happened if I hadn't locked the door behind me right away. This was in 2011. I'm female and was 22 at the time. A year after I graduated college, I was living in my first apartment with a friend. I had adopted the sweetest dog I've ever had, a run-of-the-litter Pomeranian who literally loved every person she ever met. My nephew was young at the time and would sometimes handle her a little too roughly. Sweet kid, we'd always correct him, but he didn't quite realize how little she was under all that fur. But she tolerated it without ever nipping or anything. One day, my roommate was gone and there was a knock at the door. It was a handyman who said that he was there for an annual check on the appliances. He's wearing the apartment complex standard uniform and had a badge, so I didn't really think twice about it, even though I hadn't been notified that this would be happening. And upon following up, he did really work there. He comes in and begins chatting and sort of leering. I felt uncomfortable, but not nearly as freaked out as when my dog came rushing in between us, ears back, teeth bared, and started growling at him. He kinda awkwardly laughed and went to go pet her. Odd choice for a dog that's baring his teeth at you. She immediately lunged forward like she was gonna bite him. He leaped back before she could. Tiny dog, large man, but he obviously was freaked out. At this point, she's straight up barking at him. He asked if I could put her away while he worked, and I lied and said she had separation anxiety, so I recommended that he would come back another time when I could walk her, or when my roommate was there, so one of us could be in the room with her. He never did come back. You hear about dogs being able to read people, so while I don't know if he would have done anything to me while on company hours, I still think she could sense that he wasn't a good person. She was a good girl. Last night, I was soundly sleeping in bed when I suddenly jolted awake to a loud noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like someone had broken a window and was trying to force a way into my home. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, then hid in the closet and waited for the police to arrive. As I crouched down in the darkness, I could hear his footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was wondering if the intruder would find me. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash and the sound of glass breaking. I realized the intruder had found their way into my bedroom. I could feel my body shaking with fear as the intruder was moving closer and closer to my hiding spot. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to be ready to defend myself. Just as I was about to jump out of the closet and confront the intruder, I heard the sound of the police sirens outside. The intruder must have heard them too because he quickly fled the scene. When the police arrived, they searched the house and the surrounding area, but no intruder was there to be found. They took my statement and made sure that I was safe before leaving. I'm now taking precautions to secure my home, including installing a security system and getting a dog. It was a frightening experience, but it taught me the importance of being prepared and taking steps to protect myself and my home. I'm also having someone come out to replace the door today, and this time it will not have a window. I'm a female, and this happened last year. I was watching TV in my living room when I heard a strange noise coming from the basement. At first, I dismissed it as just the house settling, but then I heard the noise again, and it sounded like someone was moving around down there. Feeling uneasy, I grabbed the flashlight and cautiously made my way to the basement door. As I descended the stairs, I could hear the sound of someone shuffling around, and my heart began to race. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I panned my flashlight around the room and was startled to see an intruder crouched behind some boxes, rifling through my belongings. I froze, not knowing what to do. The intruder looked up and saw me, and I could see the fear in his eyes as he scrambled to his feet and tried to run past me. Side note, I should mention this. I'm an amateur boxer and well versed in self-defense. I wasn't about to let him get away that easily. I tackled the intruder and wrestled them to the ground. We struggled for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I managed to pin him down and call the police. When the police arrived, they arrested the intruder and took him away in handcuffs. It turned out that the intruder was a homeless man who had been looking for a place to sleep and had broken into my basement. That made me feel kind of bad. After the incident, I installed better locks on the basement door, including a deadbolt. I'm a male and I'm 21. I was home alone in my apartment studying for an upcoming exam. It was late and I was starting to feel tired, so I decided to take a break and make myself a cup of tea. As I was waiting for the water to boil, I heard a strange noise outside my apartment. It sounded like someone was fidgeting with the doorknob. At first, I thought it might be my neighbor, so I went to the door and called out, "Hello?" But there was no answer. I started to feel a little uneasy. I double-checked the locks on the door and went back to the kitchen, but then I heard the noise again, and this time, it was louder. My heart started racing as I realized someone was trying to break into my apartment. I could hear the intruder moving around my patio, knocking over furniture, and rummaging through my little storage space. I felt trapped and terrified, but I knew I needed to stay calm and get the police on the line. After what felt like an eternity, I heard him dash off. I went to go look at the people and I saw red and blue lights flashing. They searched the area, but the man was never caught. In the aftermath, I felt violated. The next day, I talked to the manager of the apartment buildings. They plan on putting up cameras in the next few weeks, so hopefully this will deter the guy from coming back. All in all he stole was my cigarettes and my lighter. But if my door hadn't been locked, what would have happened? At around noon yesterday, my Ring camera at my back door picked up someone entering my gated back patio. They walked to the far corner of my paved area, took a picture of my Ring and the area surrounding my back door, and then left. My roommate left around 11:30 and saw lawn care at our building. We live in a 3-building townhome complex. There seemed to be some sort of lawn equipment left outside the gate when the man entered. He may have been instructed by the supervisor to take a photo for some reason. I contacted property management and am waiting to hear back from maintenance on if he was okayed by a supervisor. Wondering if anyone's encountered something like this, the steps they took to resolve it, and what the outcome was. This happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the back door. This confused me, as no one ever uses that back door. My husband and I lived in a fourplex at the time, and all the units had back doors at the top of a narrow staircase. These doors were a little inconvenient to access, as you would have to go all the way around the building and up the narrow stairs, as opposed to the wider main entrance at the front. It didn't make much sense to use the back entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who would go to that door to visit. As I approached the back door, I saw 2 men in the window standing at the door. A chill went down my spine. I did not feel safe about opening this door, so I called out, "Hello?" One of the men tapped on the window. "Yes, hello. May we come in? We're with Bresnan." At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable, but did not have any issues with it. I replied, "We're not having any issues. Is there a problem with it?" "Ma'am," the man said, "can we come in? We're servicing the area and it's important we look at your cable." I shook my head to myself. "We're not having any issues, so there's no need to stop by." "Ma'am, we're visiting every resident. Let us in so we can do our job." I noticed the man grab the doorknob and try to open the locked door. I slowly grabbed the knife from inside our knife block and held it at my chest. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, trying not to convey the shakiness of my voice. "So you don't need to be here." The 2 figures appeared to shuffle and then straighten. "Ma'am, let us in. We're on a deadline and need to do our job." I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive home from work, all while gripping the knife tighter. Ma'am. I saw them try the doorknob again. I closed my eyes and felt overwhelming gratitude, as I always lock my doors. Just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. "I'm sorry I can't help you. Could I please get your name and badge numbers? I'll give your supervisor a call and let them know that the cable is fine." I heard another shuffle, and one of the men replied, "No need to, ma'am. We're sorry we wasted your time." With that, both of the men exited the staircase and disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held that knife tight and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company or the police, but my hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't even hold the phone. With the knife still grasped to my chest and the phone falling out of my other hand, I sank to the floor and cried. When my husband returned home, I told him what had happened. I was still very shaken up and had started crying after he came home. He immediately called the cable company and spoke to a representative. They informed us that no one from their company was out on assignment in our area. The next day, we asked our neighbors if they had a visit from the company. No one had. So to the 2 creepy men that tried to break into my home under the disguise of cable repair, let's not meet. My grandparents live in a house located in a very secluded area, surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbor is about a half-mile away from their house. Whenever my grandfather has work in town for a couple days, he calls me home to take care of my grandmother, who suffers from arthritis. One night, it started raining really heavily, and the power was cut for the entire night. It was really windy, and since this house is pretty old, you could hear a lot of creaking sounds. At around 1 a.m. in the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud knocking sound on the front door. My grandmother was still sleeping, and I didn't want to wake her up. The noise freaked me out because it was impossible for someone to be out there at this time, in the rain, outside our house. But I thought maybe it's my grandfather who probably had some emergency and had to come home at this time of night. As I walked to the main door to see who it was, the knocking stopped. I saw our dog standing in the corner of the room, looking at the door with his tail between his legs. He looked super scared. I figured something wasn't right, and that if someone was outside my door, it obviously wasn't my grandfather. I went upstairs to see who it was through a window and just saw a shadow, but I'm not sure if it was actually a person's shadow or just a hallucination from my sleepy mind. I did not open the door and went back to bed. The creepiest part was, the next morning, I saw muddy footprints on my porch and a broken door handle. My friends went to Mexico for vacation and asked me to house sit and take care of their dogs while they were gone. They'd pay me $40 a day just to sit around and let their dogs go out when they needed to. I am disabled, so this helps a lot. This is a semi-rural area, and the houses were roughly a quarter-mile apart. Police have to come down from town 15 miles away, and response time can be well over an hour. I always take my pistol with me. It's always quiet when I've stayed there. This time was different. I was in the shower when the dog started barking and growling. They are big, large German shepherds, and one is actually police trained. The owners loan him to the county as a drug dog, and if you tell them to be quiet, they obey. This time they didn't, so I went on high alert. I shut off the water and looked outside the window. I didn't see anything, but when I walked out of the bathroom, I saw a shadow go across the bedroom window. I whispered to the dogs to hush, and they did. That's when I heard a man's voice. I couldn't make out everything he was saying, but I distinctly heard two words: "Come around." So I'm sure that there's more than one person. I ran into the living room with my pistol and saw the door handle turn. I yelled, "I have a gun and I will fucking use it." I heard feet run away. I was telling Siri to dial 911 and got the county sheriff fast. She said there were two cars on another call not too far away, and it would take about 20 minutes for them to get there. That's better than the usual hour, but I was shaken up. I explained that I was on a farm, and I would have to go down the road to unlock the cattle gate to let them in, and to please tell the police officers that I would be carrying a pistol, and to please not shoot me by mistake, because I was not going outside the house without it. The dispatcher said, "Oh no, do not go out there without your gun. I will tell them." The good thing about living in a red state. She asked if I could see the road, and I can. So she said, "Wait in the house until I saw blue lights." I hung up and called my friends in Mexico. Their camera footage could be downloaded via an app, and they said that they would go through it while I waited for the cops. I locked the house and went down to the gate when the police arrived. They searched the whole place, including the barn, but didn't find anything. While they were looking, my friends texted me the camera footage. There was a man on the porch. Unfortunately, cameras were not angled to get a shot of his face, and it was of course dark. I still think that there is more than one creep because of what they said. Come around. The police were very nice and said that they had passed a man on a bike on the way, which was strange for this area, especially at night, and they went to go look for him. But that's all they could do. They took a full report but never caught the creep. My husband came and stayed with me for the rest of the trip. One of our neighbors said that they found a tent and some gear near the woods a few weeks before, so maybe someone was living back there. Maybe a homeless person from town. I have house sat again since, and it was quiet. They're all going away for Christmas, and I will be there again. A lot of people asked me if I would have shot the creep if he had break it in. Yeah, absolutely. I would be sorry for hurting someone, but if it's them or me, yeah. Creepy porch guy, let's not ever meet again. A few years ago, I lived in a large apartment complex. My unit was at the very end of the first floor. A lot of strange people lived there, but seemed pretty harmless. One night, my boyfriend was over, thankfully, and we were watching a movie. I noticed a shadow pass by the window, but then I felt like it didn't completely pass by. At that point, I started feeling like I was being watched, but was too scared to turn and look. I finally look and see a silhouette of a person, and a pair of eyes peeking between the space and the blinds. I told my boyfriend someone was out there and he jumped up. We saw a person's shadow run away. My boyfriend peeks out the window and we assume he had ran around the back of the building. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. My boyfriend and I just looked at each other because it's like 1 a.m. I told him not to answer because I didn't want to open the door to anyone. After a minute of the decision, he's adamant of answering it, so I tell him to grab a knife. He opens the door and there's no one out there. He looked over and saw a man nearby a tree doing the come here motion with his hand. We called the cops and they said that they would keep an eye out, but we never heard anything more. In that moment, it felt like the beginning of a scary movie. The actual encounter was brief but terrifying. I'm a 30-year-old female. I live with my wife and our sweet orange tabby cat. We own a home in an older neighborhood in a college town. The neighborhood is mostly families and older people. Right around 2 a.m. Monday morning, my wife and I are both woken up by our cat. Immediately after we hear him, we distinctly hear someone rattling our door, making the sound that they would have been holding the door handle while trying to open it. We rush to our living room, my wife wielding her aluminum bat. She smacks our recliner and screams, "I have a fucking bat!" Our cat crouches on the ground and is growling, his hackles raised. I got 911 on the line and we all got into one bedroom with a lock on it while waiting for the police. They came by but didn't see anything. That night my wife didn't get any more sleep. I only got a little myself after our cat curled up next to me. We both called out of our jobs at the university on Monday and wound up getting lock bars for our front and back doors and replaced our back door lock with one that requires a key on both sides. This thankfully went as well as it could have, but was so out of the blue and upsetting. More than anything, this is just a reminder to stay vigilant and invest in what security measures you can. We never imagined someone would try to break in the dead of night when there are 2 cars in the driveway. This is a rather painful story to retell, and it still keeps me up at night. But I'll do my best, as my therapist says writing about it will help me out and help me get through it. It's been 2 years, and it still gets to me. It was just after midnight, and I was home alone. My husband was out of town for work and wouldn't be back for a few days. I was curled up on the couch watching TV when I heard a noise coming from the front door. At first, I thought it was just the wind or a stray cat, but then I heard it again. It sounded like someone was trying to open the front door. My heart started racing and I quickly grabbed the phone to call the police. As I was dialing, I heard a loud crash and the sound of glass shattering. Someone had broken into my home. I quietly made my way to the kitchen and hid and waited for the police to arrive. Moments later, I heard footsteps coming towards me. They were slow and deliberate and sounded like they were getting closer and closer. I knew I had to act fast, but it was panicking in my mind. I grabbed a kitchen knife and prepared to defend myself. Suddenly, the door to the kitchen burst open and a man stepped in. He was rather tall and somewhat muscular. He was wearing a ski mask that was covering most of his face. I could tell that he was older, but not much more than that. I held the knife out, rather uneasy, but he easily overpowered me and knocked me to the ground. I just laid there. He told me not to get up, not to move, and everything would be okay. So I was just laying there helpless and terrified. The man was rummaging through my belongings, every so often looking back at me. When he did, I closed my eyes. I didn't want to stare at him. Not only not to make him mad, but also I didn't want that image in my head. He took my jewelry, my money, and my phone before finally leaving the house. I was left alone, shaken and traumatized by this experience. I honestly laid there till the police came. Once I heard them, I finally got up. They searched the house and the surroundings and ended up taking a report. As of now, the man has not been caught, and this was 2 years ago. I was left to live in fear, wondering if he would ever come back. Since then, we put up cameras outside the house, and we replaced the door in the back that had a glass window, and it's now a much sturdier door. Anyway, that's my story, and I hope one day I won't think about that every night before I go to bed. I was sitting in my living room one evening, and I noticed movement outside my window. I glanced up and saw a man peering in. His face was pressed against the glass. I jumped up in shock and ran to the window, but he had already disappeared into the darkness. I felt very violated and scared, knowing that someone had been watching me in my own home. I immediately called the police, but there was little that they could do without any identifying information about this peeping Tom. The next night, it happened again. I was in my bedroom getting ready for bed when I heard rustling outside my window. I looked up and saw the same man staring at me with a look of excitement in his face. I screamed and ran to the phone, but by the time the police arrived, he was gone. This went on for weeks, with the man appearing at all hours of the night, watching me from outside my window. No matter if I had the blinds drawn or curtains up, it seemed like he would find the opening and stare in. I know this because my neighbor told me that he saw a man hanging around my house. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every noise. I tried to stay strong and vigilant, but eventually, the stress and anxiety became too much. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and felt like I was losing my mind. It was a constant battle to feel safe and secure in my own home. Finally, the police were able to catch the man in the act. It turns out that it was my neighbor who had been stalking me for months. I felt a sense of relief knowing that he was finally caught, but the trauma of the experience stayed with me for years to come. I lost my sense of security and privacy, and it took me a long time to regain those feelings again. This happened years ago when I was in college. We were 4 girls living in a dorm room. So I had this roommate, Anna, that used to stay late at night outside or at her boyfriend's, and she would always forget to lock our dorm room door. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up from a nightmare. I heard something like a girl screaming, only once, but when I realized the dorm was all quiet, I thought for sure that it was just my imagination. I noticed that Anna had returned. She was in bed and I felt a strange urge to go see if the door was locked. So for the next few minutes I had this internal dialogue. Go check the door. No, because if I stand up I'll lose my sleep. Eventually my laziness won and I fell asleep. When I woke up, my roommates briefed me on what happened that night. The whole dorm was talking about it. Apparently a stranger entered our dorm that night. He was in his late 40s. He heard some girls in the room were not sleeping and were loud, so he banged on their door and said something that I can't quite remember now. After some time, thinking he left, one of the girls went to the bathroom. The bathrooms are located in the hallway. As she was in the bathroom, he tried to break open the door. This was happening on the same floor where we lived, so that's probably why I heard the scream. Luckily, another girl saved her when she called the police and he got scared and ran away. But that's not all. Before he tried to assault that girl, he had been in the study room and vandalized it. He pooped on the floor, ripped a blouse that was on a chair, and did other stuff in there. Made the study room a mess. The study room was right next to my room, and guess what? That night we slept with our door unlocked. Just like you guys always say in here, always trust your gut. I should have trusted mine and checked the door. Thank God he didn't try our door. A few days later I heard that the police found the guy, and I heard that he was free. After that event, they increased the level of dorm security.
Evening, folks. This has been ongoing for some time now, but tonight was particularly weird. Please excuse any weird formatting. I'm doing this on mobile, currently under my blankets, kinda freaking out. So, some context. I'm 25, female, and live on the second story of my building across from a big city. We have lots of houseless people in my area, and there's a safe injection site right next to my home. I'll mention right off the bat that I have been houseless within my lifetime from the ages of 8 to 10, and grew up in the care of an addict. I completely empathize with folks who are having a tough go at things. However, I also value my safety and my neighbor's safety for that matter, so I will preemptively apologize if at any point I sound frustrated at this ongoing situation. I'm mad at the situation that has plagued both the life of myself and the houseless man who is tormenting my building. This all started about a year ago when my partner and I were nearly attacked by this houseless man while downstairs in our parking lot. To summarize the situation, we had just gotten home where my partner was going to drop me off. We didn't live together at the time. We kind of do now, but only on the weekends. And as we said our goodbyes, we noticed a man pacing in the visitor's parking lot who was seemingly having a rough time. We kept our distance, car doors locked and windows up, and eventually the man got the hint and left. Just to set the scene a bit here, my parking lot has two sections. One is a public parking guest area, and the second is a locked gate with a smaller locked door for residents to safely park overnight. The gate requires a FOB entry, and the door has a regular building key. Both were made with metal bars. This is important for later. I got out of the car and proceeded to walk towards the door, key in hand. My partner started up the car, which caused the houseless man to rush back into the parking lot and promptly attack the car. He hopped onto the hood, beating on the windows and trying to rip off the mirrors. I watched in horror as this terrifying situation evolved next to me, a mere 14 feet away. I quickly got my key into the lock and opened the door at lightning speed. The sound of my keys caught the attention of the man, and he promptly sprinted towards me. Thankfully, by this point, I had begun closing the door behind me. By the time he got to me, I slammed the door in his face and stepped backwards while he screamed at me. When my partner realized I was safely behind a locked door, he got into gear and drove away. Moments later, he called me and instructed me to get away from the door and safely upstairs. It was a good thing he did. I felt like I was in freeze mode. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding out of my chest as this houseless man screamed disgusting things at me, most of which revolved around essaying me and gesturing crudely at his groin and flicking his tongue. I finally broke my fear freeze, walked away as he chanted, pretty lady, want to taste, huh?" Those words are burned into my memory. I rushed upstairs and quickly closed the blinds of my windows. I heard him still yelling and chanting outside for a good few minutes after. But then I heard something unusual. A lighter clicking. The silence was deafening as the lighter clicked repetitively. Eventually the click stopped and he began laughing. I looked outside, peering through the blinds. I realized he was attempting to set our building's wooden fence on fire. Luckily it had rained, so the fence wasn't catching, I quickly hopped on a call with the emergency services, who sent a police car and fire truck. As soon as the cop car pulled up, the houseless man went ballistic and started screaming bloody murder. They apprehended him quickly and took him away in the ambulance. Months passed with no sign of him, but one day a resident in my building reported being attacked by a man who matched his description. After the incident, we, the residents, repeatedly heard him screaming, crying, moaning, and laughing at least 3 times a week outside our building, generally at night. He also started trashing and damaging people's cars when they parked in the guest parking lot. Thankfully, we installed a new gate last week that closes off the guest parking behind another FOB-activated gate. The thing is, as soon as the gate got installed, the man left us alone. It has been quite a week. It's been nice, but tonight, about an hour ago, I was laying in bed scrolling on TikTok when I heard what sounded like soft sobbing. At first, I thought it was coming from TikTok, but after some scrolling, I realized it was coming from outside. I looked outside, and there he was, sobbing and pacing around the back alley. He suddenly switched gears, though, and started jogging while groaning loudly and continuing to cry while occasionally hitting and attacking the new fence we installed. He has seemingly left now, but I'm terrified at this new habit. I'm really hoping he doesn't start crying outside my building routinely. I feel really bad for the guy, and I also feel bad making this post, but the whole situation is really freaking me out. I don't feel safe. My own home, and I just need to vent. Thanks for reading. If anything else happens, I'll update this post. This story happened to me back when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time and had 3 siblings that also lived at home. My brother and 2 sisters. For some context, we live on 5 acres in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by woods and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad normally left for work at 2 a.m, so I had always felt like it was my job to be the man of the house, because he was gone during the times when you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was the weekend, my dad was home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms upstairs, and coming out of our rooms, you could look down over the banister and see our front door. When I woke up, it took a few moments to get out of the haze and realize what was going on. I looked at the clock, and it was around 2:30 a.m. My brother told me there were 2 men at our front door. Of course, now, this is a real wake-up call. We quietly walked out of the room and peeked over to look at the front door. When we looked, there was no one at the door, but I noticed my parents off to the side, out of view of the glass on the front door. I whispered down to my dad, and he told me that there were 2 guys who had been talking to each other and knocking on the door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my pistol, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure they weren't at the door. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs, as it is in direct view of the door. My brother is right behind me as we headed over to where our parents are, whispering to try to find out what's going on. My parents had woken up to our dog barking and come out to see these 2 men knocking loudly at the door. At this point, we see the men return and they begin knocking again, despite the fact that no one had come to the door and our dog was still actively barking. The fact that they were there at this time in a location where houses are spread out hundreds of yards and still knocking while the dog was barking made this situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men walked away and we shuffled across the kitchen into the family room to peek out the windows into our driveway, which is lit up by our outside lights. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but no one was inside from what we could see. Immediately, the question was, where did the guys go? They weren't in the car and they were no longer at the front door. Unfortunately, we figured out the answer when the handles to our back French doors started jiggling. They were actively trying to enter the back of our house, which enters into the kitchen. At this point, I just remember my mum frantically saying David, as pure terror overwhelmed her. At this point, two things happened. Adrenaline filled my body as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might have to shoot these men. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed his phone and called the police and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute of jiggling, they stopped at the back door and disappeared again, only to return to their knocking at the front. However, at this point, several minutes had gone by and suddenly we saw the local police fly up in multiple cruisers with their lights on. As they whipped into our driveway and the yard, the two men bolted away, attempting to run the long way around the house across the driveway. One of them disappeared out of view, but the other was intercepted by an officer yelling at him to get on the ground. He didn't, and he was immediately tased and fell to the ground. Some of the officers went around the house after the other guy, and one of them came back to my dad, and as we came out to the front, they ended up finding the other man hiding in my sister's little playhouse in the backyard. It appears both of them were drunk or high, as one of them had cocaine on him. While they were both arrested that night, we never did find out what they were charged with or what happened to them. Needless to say, the whole experience wasn't fun. So, random men at our door in the middle of the night? Let's not meet again.
So let me preface this by saying I grew up in an upper middle class area. Really nice neighborhood with nothing but old people as neighbors. We lived near great schools and there was a relatively low crime rate other than one neighborhood known for meth. When I was 13, we had our first break-in. Nobody was home and I had just gotten off the bus. My mom was waiting for me at the top of the driveway in her grocery-filled car. She was on the phone with my dad. She told me to wait with her since the window was busted out. My dad came home with 3 friends and got baseball bats to search the house. Nothing. The only reason we didn't call the cops is because we have a cat who likes to sit on the windowsill, and we often left the window open for a breeze, leaving just a screen. We assumed that maybe the cat knocked out the screen by accident because someone forgot to close it. But then we later saw a boot print in the dirt going to the window. I noticed our rug is all Scooby-Dooed and rolled up from someone running. We assumed they saw our alarm system, which tracks movement and flashes, and got scared and ran thinking it was a silent alarm. What's odd is, one step after entering the window was the computer, a TV, cash, and a camera. Nothing stolen. The second time getting broken into, I was 14. Same exact thing, window busted. Nothing taken, boot print. This time we knew someone was coming after our house. We started setting our alarm more often. About 6 months later, I'm in the backyard sitting on a swing with my back facing the woods. My mom comes out on the upper deck and calls out to me saying that her and my dad are going to go see a movie and they would be back home in a few hours. I said okay and came back in through the basement door. Stupidly, I forgot to lock it. I stay in the basement in a side room with only one exit point and play Xbox. I put on my headset that covers my ears and enjoy about 20 minutes of Call of Duty before my cat, who's sitting on my lap, absolutely freaks out and bolts. I absolutely heard nothing because of my headset, but got up because she was quite scared. I see my basement door shaking after presumably slamming open into the wall. My heart drops and I think, maybe I left it cracked and the wind pushed it open. I don't see anyone standing in the doorway, but right behind the door there's a huge bush. I got a bad feeling in my gut and bolted upstairs. I burst through the basement door to my main floor, leaving it open, and run outside to my neighbors. My neighbors aren't home, but I hide in their yard while looking at my front door, which is glass and somewhat see-through. I wait for about 45 seconds and start laughing at myself, thinking I'm just crazy. That's when I see a 6-foot man walk up the basement steps and past our front door. He peeks through the glass and I see him wearing a brown shirt and has short black or brown hair. I can't tell much more because the glass is opaque and because I was in my neighbor's yard. I called my parents and get no answer. I then called my sister, who luckily worked at the theater and was there, and she answers. I explain that there's someone in her house and she gets the on-duty cop to send a bunch over. My sister rushes in the theater that my parents are in and they call a nearby neighbor that has guns to go check on me. At the time, they thought I was still in the house. I see the man in my house turn away from the front door and head left down the hall. The left side of the hall has my parents' room and an office room. The office room is what he usually entered, assuming it was the same guy breaking in. After 30 seconds, I see him pass the front door again and go down the right side. That's where my room and my sister's room was. My neighbor is now coming into my yard with a pistol and calling for me, but he doesn't know I'm across the street and I'm too scared to yell to him. Right as he's turning to the front of the yard, he entered through the side. I see the man come back out and go downstairs where he presumably left through the basement door. Poor neighbor probably thought I was kidnapped, so I called him on his cell phone to let him know that I was across the street. No joke, 6 police came, 3 dogs, and they were all armed and ready. They kneeled in front of my garage, and my parents rushed home using the garage door opener to open it for them. Looked like a movie where they all had their guns out and the dogs aiming at the garage in case he was hiding. He was not there, which I knew from seeing him go back downstairs. The dogs start sniffing. They find a scent outside and follow it, but end up just picking up another cop's scent and losing it. They search the entire house and say it's clear, and I go back inside. We sent a neighborhood email out that night, and the next morning we got a response from a neighbor 6 doors down on the edge of the woods. I saw a man sprinting through the woods back into the meth neighborhood. He didn't get a good look at him, but definitely saw him sprinting, so he must have escaped through the back door and then ran back into the woods. The more I thought back on the experience, the more I realized these things. 1. It was probably the same guy since nothing was ever stolen and they were within a year and a half. 2. This man clearly didn't want money because he had tons of expensive things lying around that he didn't take. He searched East Hall for 30 seconds and left. He was looking for something or someone. 3. When I had my back to the woods on the swing, I think he was watching me. When my parents said they were leaving, he must have taken that as an opportunity. He had to have heard me because he came through the least visible door, the one I had gone through. 4. I was in a room that had no exits. If my cat wasn't on me, I wouldn't have heard him and he would have blocked my only exit and done God knows what. 5. I'm lucky he hid for a second before coming in. I'm guessing he wanted to make sure no one else was with me and waited to listen. 6. He was seen running back to the meth neighborhood, so he was probably drugged out and wanted to kill me. He never once took an item and only broke in 3 times when my parents weren't home. I strongly believe that this man wanted to find me, and I think he was watching me from the woods. There's no telling how many days he watched me, because I used to sit on that swing nearly every day. He was probably waiting for the right time for me to be alone. I love my cat to death and fully give her credit for saving my life. If she wasn't so loving, and if she didn't want to be on my lap every waking hour of the day, I would have never known he came in. And I don't even like thinking about what he would have done to me when he had my one exit sealed off. It's still super scary to think about, and I'm not gonna lie, I hated being alone even up until I moved to college. I occasionally hear very distinct boot noises running up my stairs and back down. I would always check the back deck to see if anyone was leaving, but never saw anything. I constantly set the alarm from there on out and hated going on the swing when no one was home after that. Gave me some lasting paranoia too. So to the man who probably wanted to gut me, let's please not meet again. I was around 8 years old. I was playing Super Mario in my room at night, probably around 8 p.m. or so. I had a large window, like 2 normal windows side by side. The blinds were down but were slightly open so you could see the darkness outside. While I was playing, I had a feeling like I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked to the left and clearly saw the outline of a white t-shirt in the window. Looked like the size of an adult. I remember being frozen and the hair standing up on my skin. I was petrified. It felt like minutes, but it was only seconds. I dropped my controller and ran out the room, telling my mom immediately. Just as that happened, I remember my dad pulling into the driveway. He said he saw nothing and checked around the whole house and everything, but found nothing. I was so scared though. I tried to even tell myself that it was a reflection of something in the room, but I knew what I saw. I tried to sit in that same spot for a few days to recreate the reflection and what it would look like, but nothing ever caused that look. I knew it. Someone was watching me. This all just happened 15 minutes ago and I'm freaked out, but hopefully I'll do an okay job recapping what just happened. At my apartment building, it's all street parking. Tonight as I pulled in and parked, I noticed a man walk in the opposite direction from me. But then we made eye contact and he immediately turned around and walked in my direction. At first I thought it was strange, but then he started to cross the street and was making a beeline for me. He wasn't saying anything at all, so I didn't think he wanted money or directions. It freaked me out, so I frantically grabbed my keys out of my purse and peeled out of there. What freaked me out though was that he was close enough to getting to my car at that point that I made crystal eye contact and he looked pissed. So I drove off and circled around. I did not see that guy anywhere, but decided to circle around again and look super carefully. Once again, looking around the sidewalk and the street, and he's not walking around. I start to get out of my car and I see the guy coming out of the area where there were a bunch of bushes where I guess he had been hiding. Again, he beelines it for me. At this time, I'm actually on the phone with a really good friend of mine who at this point says he'll drive over. Luckily, he lives about 10 minutes from me. Said friend looks around and walks me into my apartment where I am safe now. But seriously, what the hell was that all about? He didn't say anything threatening to me, so I don't think I can call 911. But I do think I'll try the non-emergency number when I calm down. Stay safe out there, folks. So the other night I was watching TV at 4 a.m. because I have stupid sleeping habits. I started hearing someone scream in despair. I opened my windows to take a look out closer, but the person was behind some trees and I couldn't make out what was going on. The screams were loud and painful, sounded like a woman, but I was not sure. The person finally got past the trees and I was able to see 2 men and 1 woman. The woman was screaming and the men were there, trying to help or being the reason she was screaming. Being a woman myself, I assumed the worst and called the local police. They are like 20 meters away from where it was happening. I don't know how they didn't hear what was going on. I described the situation and the location, and the police officer said that they were going to go check on it. The woman was still screaming. I couldn't understand what, then collapsed on the floor. The men were behind her, but they went on their way as she kept walking towards the police station. I never saw a police officer come out of the station, but they could have taken a route that I couldn't see from my window. I hope everything was okay with her, and that she just had some bad news delivered and was stressing out, and they were just friends helping. But if that was the case, I don't understand why they went away. The police said that they would call me back if they needed any info, but never did. First post here. It's short but creeped me and my wife out. I stayed up last night, couldn't sleep because I drank coffee way close to bedtime. My wife usually falls asleep way before I do and doesn't wake up to anything. Anyways, I stayed up watching videos and movies and even read a few stories on here. Back and forth to the kitchen getting snacks and drinks. Finally decided to try to go to bed around 2:30 a.m. but was tossing and turning. I decided to take a hot shower as that usually relaxes me. I got up, took a pain pill, recent surgery, and I was kinda hurting. I finally fell asleep around 3:30 a.m. My wife gets up around 7:30 a.m. to use the restroom and yells, "Babe, the front door is open." I stumble out of bed and grab my pistol, heading towards the living room. I look around and see a dim blue light coming in because the sun is beginning to rise and the door is halfway open. I quickly shut it and lock it, go back to my kids' room, and they're both sound asleep. I check the kitchen, bathroom, even our closets. Nothing. I start looking for missing things like keys, console, belongings, and everything is still in place. Nothing is missing. I look at the windows, vehicles still parked. We never use the front door ever. It's always deadbolted and locked, and I don't remember the last time we used it. Where our driveway is the more convenient way to go in through the kitchen back door. We never figured it out. I was back and forth through the living room all night and the door was closed. This is the first time this happened to me in 10 years that we've been here. Never any crime or break-ins around here. It really creeped us out. This happened last year sometime. I'm a small guy and I'm married. We live in a sketchy apartment complex. Anyway, we were sleeping one night and out of nowhere, someone starts pounding on our door at like 2 a.m. We both wake up shocked and a little scared because neither of us really have any close friends or family here. Because we are both kind of antisocial, and the people we do have would call multiple times before showing up. We also at the time didn't have a peephole, and we were the only people with a white door instead of a red door. So when we have new people come over, we tell them that. We didn't answer the door, but I grabbed a kitchen knife just in case. They kept pounding on the door for a good 5 minutes, while also sometimes trying the handle to get in. When they finally stopped and left, we watched them from our window as they got into an SUV. We still have no idea who it was, but I still think about it sometimes. I'm hesitant to share my story, but I feel it's important to warn others about the dangers of being a peeping Tom. You see, I used to be one. It all started out when I was a teenager, and I discovered the thrill of watching people through their windows at night. At first, I didn't think it was harmful. I was just curious about what people did in their private lives. But as time went on, my obsession grew. I found myself spending hours every night peering into strangers' homes, watching them go on about their daily routines. I thought I was being careful. I never got caught and I made sure not to do anything that would harm anyone. But then one night, everything changed. I was watching a woman through her bedroom window when she suddenly turned and caught me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there, staring at her in terror. To my surprise, she didn't call the police or scream for help. Instead, she walked over to the window and opened it. I thought she was going to confront me, but instead, she just looked at me with pity in her eyes. She told me what I was doing was wrong and that it could have serious consequences. She also told me she understood why I was doing it, that she had been in a dark place before and done things that she wasn't proud of. That conversation changed my life. I realized what I was doing was not only wrong, but also harmful to myself and others. I stopped being a peeping Tom after that night and never looked back. It's been years since that incident, but I still think about it often. grateful to that woman for showing me compassion and understanding when I needed it the most. And I hope that my story can serve as a warning to others who might be tempted to engage in similar behaviors. It's never too late to change your ways and make a positive difference in the world.